line, the imam is not able to connect, please just let's start with an opening prayer, then we can go
Oh,
into this. Thank you.
okay. Okay. All right. Let's pray, folks. Let's pray. Almighty Allah, we we come here today to have a conversation about the future of the African community in this country. We ask you, Almighty God, to give us the wisdom, the courage, the strength, and to give us the patience with each other so as we dialogue through this conversation. We ask you to please help us navigate through the difficulties of the politics of this country and give us really a good ability to be able to really succeed in this effort. It's only you that can make this work for us. We've done our part. We've invested our time and our resources. We ask that you guide us through the process to allow us to really deliberate and come up with a very successful solution. So in God's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I'm on a
Thank you
conference
so
call.
much, Famal Kone. So thank you all for coming. You're welcome. My name is Buki Shonoga, Bukola Shonoga. I'm co-founder of the United African Coalition. This organization was founded in 2013 to represent the electoral politics of the African immigrants in America. And again, thank you for coming. My co-host, also co-founder, Stephanie Arthur. Ibrahim Soare is the moderator of this session and he's also a tech person as far as Zoom. But he was not able to join us. So that created a little chaos, but we'll manage as much as we can. Again, I welcome you all. And I'm going to yield to our chairman, Charles Cooper. Charles, thank you so much for joining us, and you're welcome to give an opening remark.
Thank you, Bukola. Good afternoon, everyone. And to our folks overseas, I'd like to say good evening. To our distinguished guests, panelists, delegations, and dignitaries, welcome, and thank you for attending this event. Special thanks, of course, to all the organizers, Bukola Shola, Stephanie Arthur, Ibrahima, who could not be here this evening from Okone. This event is much needed, especially for us Africans in the diaspora, and focusing our efforts and concentration on this coming election. As Bukola has shared, the goal of the United African Coalition is a platform that encourages Africans in the diaspora to impact the community through civic engagement. Additionally, the goal is to also facilitate a mutual participation and cooperation between the U.S. and Africa through investment and other models. In many parts of the world, a presidential election is the most important job interview anyone can have in that country. But in the U.S. of A, it's the most important job you can have in the world. The global policies and agenda of the United States impact the global community with a broad stroke. Many of these communities are ones we left, such as myself, to find a better life in the U.S., to raise our families, and to excel within our occupation. Most people today refer to this age as the age of globalization, and none have been highlighted more than what we all as global citizens have experienced due to COVID-19, where unexpectedly the world was shut down. Airports were closed, and for the very first time, the populace had to look out of that bubble. You know, whether you was in the America bubble, or you was in the European bubble, or you was in the Liberian bubble or Ghanaian bubble, you had to look out and reflect on the global supply chain we all need for our day-to-day survival. That's why I prefer the term that we are all really interdependent, because it's clear that the nature of the world today and our connection are far more than just economic. It's health, it's democracy, it's safety, and because it's clear that the consequences of those relationships can be both negative and positive, it's of utmost importance that we stay engaged. Uh, Africa is a place and always must play a substantial part of that interdependence and engagement, from providing natural resources. You know, most of the technology company out there use resources from Africa. That's where a lot of the technology, the electronics, the minerals, etc., that goes into different components. So Africa having the opportunity to be the bread basket of the world, because we have very fertile land and agriculture. These are all opportunities that exist. So supplying the world with some of the greatest scholars and athletes the world have ever seen. And so Africa has a lot to offer the world and a lot to offer the US. Africa has a role to play, and that is why the African agenda is important, because when Africa succeeds, the world succeeds. For this to happen, though, we must have leadership that understands the intricacies of Africa and willing to work with the Africans in the diaspora to create a stronger connection with African countries through trade, democracy, and the rule of law, foreign investment in infrastructure, health, and safety. I believe that the Biden and Harris team is uniquely situated to do just that. Not only the historical significance with having the first female vice chair that is overly, competent to take on the role at any time as president, but to also have Biden, Joe Biden, who worked under the Obama administration and had an opportunity to help lead the country. And today we sit at a sensitive time, dealing with coronavirus and basically the global economy shut down. We need someone there that don't need a training wheels, that understand that Africa must play a role and that able to reach across the aisle to immigrant communities to get them engaged. And so once again, I believe the Biden-Harris team is the team that will do that. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Well said. We have a special guest of honor here, Assemblyman Michael Blake. Honorable Blake, are you on? Okay, I don't see him in the waiting room. Okay, let me just check in with him because we're about to start this program and I just want him to speak ahead of that. Just give me a quick second. So I just checked in with him. So while we're waiting, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Assemblyman Michael Blake. He's a friend, a brother, our community partner, and we've supported him since he ran for the assembly seat and also recently with the Congress race. That we worked really hard, and he also worked tirelessly to really win that race. But unfortunately, that's not the case. But we still love him, and we will support anything that Michael, sets out to do, whatever his next, endeavor is. So very talented young man, brilliant, intelligent, uniquely qualified. So we support him, whatever he wants to do next. So I think it's probably, I'm not sure if you're joining. Let me see if it's anyone in the waiting room. So I don't see him here. So I think we just, when he comes on, we would just then have him say a few words. So we're going to get this program started. Okay, I'm also being corrected, not corrected, that also Michael Blake is the vice president of DNC. So I just added that too. All right, so one quick sec while I'm multitasking here. All right, so Biden Harris. I just missed my script for a second. Right, so welcome to Biden Harris, U.S. Africa Trade and Economic Development. Okay, welcome to Biden Harris, the African Agenda. This event is informed by two topics that we are going to be focusing on today. One is the Africa Trade Bill, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, a piece of legislation that was approved by the US Congress and signed into law by President Clinton in May 2020. The purpose of the legislation is to assist the economies of sub-Saharan Africa and to improve economic relations between the United States and the region. The second topic, or the second idea that informed, again, this conference we're having today, is President Obama's Young African Leadership Initiative, YALI, fellowship that was launched in 2010 to support an emerging generation of African leaders as they work to drive economic growth, enhance democratic governance, and strengthen the civil society structures that will help the continent grow and prosper. So those are the two, not kind of questions, those are the two overview that we are focusing on today, the premise on which this conference has been set. As Charles just articulated, trade is very important, especially U.S. trade policy, U.S. trade policy, I'm sorry, I lost my word. U.S. Africa trade and economic development policy is very key to both continents, both the U.S. and Africa. And as you may know, Africans are the most educated immigrants in America, and we remit combined $45 billion to Africa every year. And that speaks to the fact that we're not from shithole countries. I mean, I just call it like it is, as the current person at the White House has stated. So we've contributed enormously to the economy of this country, to the culture of this country. Our children, second generation, third generation, are also here. That's an example of how much we've contributed and how much gain we have contributed and continue to contribute, especially with our children. And with the amount of money that we remit to Africa every year, trade exchange is very important. So this is why we feel that this is a really, should be one of the central component of our conversation today. And the YALI program, fellowship program, Young African Leadership Initiative, that is also another component that's so crucial to Africa's development. When we talk about young professionals, knowledge transfer is a big deal and it's very important, especially in the 21st century. And again, Africans come here, we get educated, we contribute a lot to this society, but what do we give back to homeland, not just in terms of remittances, but knowledge transfer is very critical. And we've considering that Africans are the most educated immigrants in America. So that's a colossal, how do I put it, talent there that we can find a way to facilitate the engagement or transfer of knowledge to Africa through young professionals for economic growth in Africa. So on that note, I'm going to go to our first panelist, Dana Reed. And also, I want to inform that the order in which these panelists, they arranged in order of there's something, I mean, there's a reason why, in other words, someone came first as opposed to the other person. Priority is given to people that are joining us from, you know, Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, and Senegal. But Dana also has another engagement, and Dana is based in the US. That's why we have Dana first. All right. Dana Reed is an impact investor and advisor with 25 years of experience in financial services. She's co-founder and CEO of Inyansapo Impact Capital, an investment advisory firm specializing in African SMEs. Previously, Dana was the CEO of Pan-African Investment Company or Corporation, a New York-based private investment firm with a mission to make impact in Africa by identifying and investing in African SMEs that promote growth and development in the region. Dana has also worked with JP Morgan as a senior associate, also Goldman Sachs, a senior analyst, and she's a fellow at the Export-Import Bank of the US. Dana Reed, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks, Bukola, and thank you for having me. It's great to be on here at this time to talk about these important trade policies. So thanks for giving my background. I don't need to go through it, but I do come to this discussion understanding the current policies that are in place in Goa and whatnot, as Bukola mentioned. But I come as an impact investor and having, I guess the last 10 years, I have been doing impact investing on the continent. And I've watched policies that have been put in place that hasn't been fully utilized. I'm sure we'll get further into in Goa a little bit later in the discussion, but there is a timeline to that. And so some of the things I look at, has it been fully utilized? I do a lot of work with Ellington Arnold and the U.S. African Development Foundation, who you'll be hearing from as well. And they're doing great, you know, on the ground, grassroots, putting capital to work on the ground in Africa. And so as a private investor, I am always watching government policies and programs that can help to facilitate what we do in the private sector, because the two have to go hand in hand. And so there's a couple of really interesting trends that I am confident a Biden-Harris administration will grow and further, which will benefit all of us in the diaspora. So 2 years ago, as many of you know, the 54 African countries signed into law the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the CFTA we call it. And I just feel like it didn't get enough press and not enough people know about it. So when we have these types of forums, it's fantastic to let people know because what that did, and we all know how big Africa is, but it has created the largest free trade market in the world since the formation of the World Trade Organization, WTO. So everybody knows about that, but nobody knows that Africa now, from a trade perspective, although there are 54 different countries and thousands of different languages, from a trade perspective, it is the largest free trade zone. And so that's, you add that to the 1.3 billion people that are there and having the youngest population in the world, it'll have the largest workforce by 2050. And now we have the largest free, I keep saying it, the largest free market zone in the world. That's nothing but opportunity. It's going to take us in these conversations to let everybody know that. The other thing, that another important trend that you're seeing, so we have these agreements, but are they being utilized? And, you know, so in my opinion, Africa is doing its part. You know, they've created this market, you know, they've relaxed the borders, you know, for Africans to travel freely between countries without, you know, passports, and like all of that, you know, facilitates easier trade. But what are we doing over here in the States? Because this is about the diaspora. And so the International Development Finance Corp, which is the DFC, was formed, call it, but really renamed in January of this year. Renamed, previously it was OPIC. And so they recently announced that they will be investing $8 billion on the continent in the next 5 years. Tremendous. because we haven't seen the US actually putting capital to work like that. And that 8 billion is going to be across 300 projects on the continent. They are hiring locally. And this is in addition to the 7 billion they already have invested that OPIC already had. So when you look at that, right, those are dynamics that are great, and all trends are pointing in the right direction. What we don't often talk about is all of the, and this is where my work with the USAID African Development Foundation comes into play in organizations such as theirs. You know, there's a missing middle. So what's the missing middle? The missing middle is of the lack of capital that goes into SMEs on the continent. So small, medium enterprises. They just don't get the capital. And so it has been estimated that less than 10% of the investable companies on the continent actually receive capital. And that, again, from an investor's perspective, like one, that's a huge opportunity. But two, why isn't this capital flowing, and where is it flowing? So where it's flowing typically is in the form of aid, which we can talk all day and all night about that. There is a need for aid, but aid is not the only solution for Africa, right? We need to see investment capital going into these companies to grow them. Because for Nyan Sapo Impact Capital, we are about wealth creation for the diaspora. And that's wealth creation for the entrepreneurs that we invest in. It's wealth creation for the investors that come into our fund, and which means, right, so who are your investors, right? We're still actively raising money, but it is important for us to have investors that look like us. So our investors will also be from the diaspora, right? Because that's where wealth is generated, right? Investment and return. So there's that. And once you start to grow these businesses, that's where you're creating wealth. And that takes all of us in the diaspora to another place where we, as a whole, are less dependent on aid, which has been the solution for Africa for far too many years. And as we are watching these policies being implemented, it is up to us to figure out how to work with the administration to actually to realize what these policies were intended. And so that's an overview of what's happening, and I'm looking forward to a Biden-Harris, not just because Harris went to my alma mater, Howard University, but because I do believe that they understand this, and they won't create more of the same type of policies that will have the continent, dependent on aid alone. And I think that they will engage the private sector. They will understand the power of the African immigrant population. I know that already with some of the work I've done with the campaign, and knowing Bukola and Stephanie's organization. There's a huge block of not just voters, but as Bukola mentioned, scholars, business people. And it's time for us to be heard, and for the diaspora to work together with the right administration to see this buying power, to see the companies get invested in, to see all of that really start to take effect, and for all of us on this call to be a part of it. I'm not sure, so I will pause there. I'm not sure, Bukola, are we taking questions, or are you just going to move on? But I'm happy to answer questions or anything.
Are you going to stay on for a minute, or you have to leave?
I have another, I'm sorry, it's just that it's CBC and United Nations week, so I do have another one in 15 minutes.
All right, does anyone have any quick question for Dana? Because the Q&A is supposed to come after, but again, because she has to leave.
Right, but I will come back, Bukola, remember, I'm coming back at 2.
Okay.
Do you want me to wait till then?
I think so.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
I will see you guys soon.
See you soon. Okay, our next speaker, I'm still trying to find Shelton. Are you on? Shelton Jefferson? So Shelton is not able to log on. And so our international panelists, a couple of them are having issues logging on. So what I'm gonna do is going to go to Stephanie Nail-Skin. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Can you hear me? Okay, 1 second. Am I on mute? All right. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I cannot hear Stephanie. I think something with your audio. Can you all hear me though?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can hear you. I
Yeah.
think she can hear you, but I think she's trying to dial up so she can get on another audio.
Yeah. I think it's the audio.
Still no audio. No audio.
So okay.
Hmm.
Let's see. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Very well. Thank you.
Oh, you can. You can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great.
So I'm looking for my.
Oh,
Just
okay. So I'm on.
yes, you're on. Just a second. I just want to do multitasking. Oh my God. Okay. So Stephanie is founder director of the Senegalese American Bilingual School in Dakar. Stephanie Nels Kane was raised in Baltimore, Maryland, and Frankfurt, Germany. She graduated from the HBCU Morgan State University and shortly after graduation traveled to Senegal. She has traveled extensively throughout Europe and Africa and has lived in Dakar since 1985. She has also lived in Mali, Ghana, Tanzania, and Kenya. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead. Do we have your audio now? Or okay, we cannot hear you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I'm going to close off one and I hear an echo here.
You know what?
Okay. How is that good?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you okay?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So, thank you, Bookie. Yes, so as I said, I've been living outside of the United States for so long. I hope I can really contribute to this conversation and dialogue. As you said, I am the founder of the Senegalese American Bilingual School in Dakar, which is a English-French learning community of about 1,300 students from over 30 countries, and 35% of our students are U.S. passport holders. We've graduated over 800 students who are studying in universities around the world, but mainly in the US, Canada, and China now. Many have already returned and are involved in innovative entrepreneurial initiatives that are changing the landscape in renewable energies, farming, design and fashion, and technology. I can speak sparingly about the YALI program because many of the YALI fellows I know personally because they've come through our program. In Senegal, they are, upon their return, they're usually able to start small initiatives, but very small. The good thing is that at least their initiative, and every initiative has to have a beginning. However, many of the YALI fellows are very young and lack the experience or the resources to do things on a scale that would actually move and improve economies. So one of my suggestions for the Biden-Harris candidates in terms of legislation is to support more middle-range entrepreneurs and professionals who have had more field experience and enough leadership skills to scale up initiatives that could actually have a greater impact. Because many of the YALI fellows are young, once taken to the US, they get their eyes open and take any opportunity to go back to the US that they can. Some of them return to the US disenchanted because here they lack the experience and the specific skills and resources and the maturity to navigate the realities of starting and sustaining and growing businesses here on the continent. So I would like to see a reverse YALI program. I think it could be interesting supporting African immigrants in the US with the resources and tools to return to the continent and set up businesses, bringing back our best and brightest. I see this also playing out in the educational arena to support undergraduate and graduate students returning to the continent to do their OPT, which I think are the 2 years that they're granted to stay in the US, to do internships and to create startups here. So, did you want me to go on to your second question, or? I can't hear you now.
Okay, I was on mute. Can you all hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yeah.
Right, I was saying that we invited you because of the work that you have done, extensive work you've done in international education. So in terms of knowledge transfer, that, you know, American kids can go to Africa from here, and also African kids can come and learn from here. And that would help economic growth on the ground instead of migration. So there's a lot of, you know, colossal brain drain for the last 50 years from Africa to all parts of the West. And that's because even after Africans have finished their education, such as myself and a lot of us on this platform, there is no really incentive to go back to Africa and contribute because of so many reasons. But for younger people that you're working with in international education, this is a good way to begin to really train them to go back and help economic growth in Africa. That's why, you know, we have invited you. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Oh, I thought you wanted to add something along YALI.
Well, I can just say that I think that by giving our students entrepreneurial, service learning, and rural community experience, they are able to understand better the needs of their community and what they can do. And so it fuels their desire to return back to the continent. And we've had great success with our students coming back because they have an idea, but we've integrated that into our curriculum. So I encourage, you know, all schools to integrate that because it's not obvious. With the US as the land of promise and opportunity, it's hard to kind of reorient students to believing that the opportunity is really here on the African continent, and we know that Africa is the future. Yeah, so I mean, I'll be willing to take questions later.
Thank you. So while we're waiting for, again, our international panelists to join, they're really having challenges. Dr. Badiwa, are you on by any chance? I don't see you in the wait room. So now I'm gonna move on. I also want to, actually an oversight on my part, my co-panelist, co-host rather, and co-founder of United African Coalition, Stephanie Arthur, she's going to be moderating the session on domestic policy. I forgot to mention that, you know, at the beginning of the program. So Stephanie will be taking on the next session on domestic, on Biden-Harris domestic policy. Thank you. So our next speaker, Jean Adams. Jean is Director of Collaborative Education at Bronx Community College, the City University of New York. In this capacity, Mr. Adams leads the college's efforts in developing and strengthening Bronx-wide educational partnerships with elementary, middle, and high schools. Mr. Adams has participated in the Bronx Community College partnership with universities and schools in Senegal and South Africa. Mr. Adams has used African international education and service learning experience as a tool for empowering New York's urban youth by coordinating trips for high school and college-age students. Yes, Jean Adams, welcome.
Hey, what's up? Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone?
To know.
Yeah, I had to give this a lot of reflection. I come into this discussion about policy and specifically international policy and electoral politics, I guess from a slightly different perspective. My background had been in really grassroots organizing and dealing with policies from a grassroots level, and how administrative policies, specifically in the United States, had impacted, or continue to impact on African Americans. Through that process of engagement, I also began to realize at a very young age that much of our success in the United States would be linked to our ability to communicate and engage, specifically folks in Africa, but also the Caribbean and other places. So I've never truly developed a sense of confidence and belief in the electoral process. That doesn't mean I don't understand it. It doesn't mean, of course, that I'm against it. I definitely think we need to be adamantly and actively and aggressively involved. But my perspective on it is, from my own experiences. So as it relates to Africa specifically, I've had about a good 20, 30 years experience working in and out of Africa. And I've seen, the African evolution, let's say specifically over the last 20 years, the increases in the middle class, the increases in quote unquote political freedoms and electoral freedoms in Africa. And of course, the rising number of young people on the African continent and the role that education has been playing. So I look at that and I say to myself, wow, long before Biden-Harris, long before Obama, and for generations, the United States has fundamentally ignored the growth in Africa and potential economic opportunities that could both benefit the African market and also benefit the American market. But I think the last 20 years, if we take a careful look at what has happened in Africa, creates a vast opportunity for more American engagement, specifically around policies and around industry and business applications. We've always ignored that in favor of the idea of aid. And I think we've developed enough as a community of activists and educators and business people to know that financial aid or USAID or a monetary fund has extreme limitations in terms of what they've been able to offer Africa in terms of its economic mobility. But I think that we're in a period now where if we push for greater engagement, some of the things that have happened with the African Growth and Opportunities Act were very, very good. We need to bring that more to the forefront and make more assessments of what parts of those programs have been beneficial and what parts have not. The push towards free trade has benefited Africa in certain ways. But at the same time, though, here in the United States, in relationship to our farm subsidies, really do undermine, African producers who might have products that could be very well represented in the United States. We're talking about economic policies and we also have to talk about the U.S. Africa Command and how that will play out in regards to how Africans view it and what it is actually. We still continue to wrestle with, issues in Africa, like around, the issue of corruption. But even that has decreased. I mean, it's not decreased to the point where it's not a major factor. But we know that on their own, the African leaders are trying to create more viable economic environments for investment. And we need to push for economic policies that help strengthen those leaders in their efforts to produce viable opportunities that definitely benefit, the African market as well as the African consumer. We know that the purchasing power in Africa has increased dramatically since 2000. And we also know then with that purchasing power, there's a rise in local incomes. But we need to have, I think, more micro initiatives that are both come out of the United States, but also support small businesses in Africa. Where I live and where most of us live, it's not just major enterprises and major industries that fuel economic growth. Oftentimes it is small businesses. And with new models for operation, I think small enterprises or small shops could very well benefit local markets as well as have a larger impact on the general market. Now, I'm here in the United States, and a lot of my work at Bronx Community College, as you know, is focused on strengthening the capacity of African students, African immigrant students. We have about 1,200 African students at Bronx Community College. Vast majority of them are lean towards the sciences and technology. A lot of them want to go back home. I mean, that is a conversation I hear all the time. But the economics of going home are very difficult, not only because of the lack of money, but also they have overall a tremendous lack of understanding for how systems work and how do you impact on systems to create change, or in a lack of focus on the idea of policy. Everyone's thinking of a job, which of course we all get, especially for young people. But I think part of our responsibility is to begin to help young people begin to see the role that policies make and how the US policies as well as policies in their own home countries either are hindering in some ways or sometimes actually benefiting. But the African students that we have here, I think we need to continue to work with them as a community, and African community leaders in the United States need to begin to have more discussions about economics and more discussions around policy so that they can have a voice here, of course, but also they can begin to have a more critical eye and begin provide more support to policy initiatives and policy debates back in their home countries. So with that being said, I'm for the last, maybe 10 years, I run an initiative where we actually do ongoing, sessions with African students in which we talk about these kinds of issues, and we talk about the return home and what are some of the challenges that they have around going back home, about getting home, and about being able to go home and then move into a sector where they not only find a job, but they find an opportunity where they can be a part of policy development or a greater part of economic growth. Everybody wants to work, and I think a lot of our African students in the United States are kind of primed for the job, but they're not really primed for careers. And I think part of our responsibility here would be to provide opportunities, provide workshops, and provide initiatives so that we can do that. And while we're talking about the American policies, I think we need to be saying here in the United States, one of the things that I think could influence U.S. policy is if we, as the older generation, begin to really have ongoing discussions, activities, workshops, leadership development, environments and activities that help the young African student in the United States understand some of these things that we believe to be important. And that's pretty much it for right now. Is that cool, Buki? Hello, I'll start telling jokes. Everybody will run off the Zoom.
Okay, I'm here. Sorry,
Okay, good.
I was on mute. So I was saying that I was sort of crowdsourcing for some instruction here on how to add people as panelists. I pre-registered everyone. That was how you were able to join. But I can invite people while we're on Zoom. But obviously, or I cannot invite them as panelists. So that's why people are having problem. Some of the panelists are having problem joining us. In other words, they were pre-registered, but that link did not work for them.
Right,
And I would like to add them here. I'm able to add them as participants, but not as a panelist. So I'm asking, is there anyone on this platform that knows how to do that? So you can help me. Help us out so they can join us. Anyhow, so the next best thing that I believe I'm going to do is to try and get Shelton Jefferson on the phone via WhatsApp and have him just do a little presentation. So bear with me a second, because it's important that you're really able to weigh in on this. Okay, just one quick second. He's tried everything and he's just not able to join. Hey, Shelton, so you're on WhatsApp live, so people can hear you. So I think you have to do your presentation this way. I'm sorry, because your knowledge on this is so important. So I have to, this is the next best thing. So let me just hold on a second, please, so I can introduce Shelton. Just one second. Shelton, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Just speak as loud as possible. So Holton, I'm gonna just do a little intro. So Shelton Jefferson is Managing Director, IFS South Africa. He's based in Johannesburg, South Africa. Shelton brings nearly 20 years of investment banking and advisory experience, structuring transactions for municipal and corporate clients. He served as counsel to the legislative and regulatory arm of the New York State Legislature's Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions Committee. In that capacity, Jefferson reviewed, developed, and wrote legislation to manage the structure and issuance of nearly $15 billion of debt per year through New York's parastatals. He has successfully performed financial advisory and structured various financing types, including venture capital, telecommunications, energy, and innovative financing structures. I think I will leave it there. Shelton, welcome, and please go ahead and weigh in on this.
All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Can you guys hear him? Hello?
Yes.
You can hear him. Okay. So go ahead. We'll try. This is the best we can do.
Well, I had been asked to speak a little about AGOA in terms of how that might be helpful to developing investment in Africa. I think I'm going to, I will speak a little on AGOA, but let me give you a little general background in terms of how after 40 years of being involved on the African continent, as both an investor and now as a banker, the first thing, if we are talking about AGOA or USAID, they are both set up for one purpose, and that purpose is to benefit Americans. It's not set up to benefit Africa per se. So what we have to do is to look at the actual structure of the program and programs like it to see if we can, in fact, mold and shape it to provide mutual benefit. So the first thing I would say is let's take a look at U.S. investment in Africa. U.S. investment in Africa, we just heard Dana talk about a program that was going to put $8 billion into Africa as a whole, the 54 countries. Everyone may find it interesting that the state of New York, through their pension fund, has a program investing $5 billion over 5 years. So if one state is doing $5 billion, it tells a lot about U.S. policy towards Africa. $8 billion is supposed to be meaningful. Now, in finishing that, let's say glaring disparity, let's take a look at what the initial impact of AGOA was. Charlie Rangel, or Congressman Charlie Rangel, basically was one of the authors of the bill. He took a lot of heat from Jesse Jackson Jr. because he felt the bill really did not help Africa at all. And for the first 5 or 6 years, arguably, it was not extremely helpful. Some of the components that had to be taken out were things to the effect that, in terms of textiles, if you wanted to ship textiles duty-free to the U.S., the textiles had to be made to the U.S. thread, which raised the cost, etc. So I think it was about 2005 that it was changed. And so we're now in a situation where really 2 countries get 80% of the money, or 80% of the benefit of the trade, and that's Nigeria and South Africa. South Africa's exporting cars. So arguably, if the majority export of South Africa is automobiles under the Agricultural Growth and Opportunity Act, someone has found a loophole. And yes, it does help South Africa, but on the other hand, it could be argued that it hurts Detroit. We won't get into that, but I did want to also show where basically 40% of the trade is going, and that's going into the production of automobiles. Then the other 40% is in Nigeria, and that's in reduced pricing for oil, basically, which does help the U.S. as a whole, and really doesn't do as much for the continent per se, but that is what AGOA basically has done. So what can we do to improve AGOA? What you'll find is that the AGOA has improved the diversity of the products coming out of Africa, the non-oil, the non-automotive. So these agricultural and textile products, we've seen more countries in Africa begin to develop those markets and sell some to the U.S. On the other hand, if you look at the EU's policies have increased both the total amount of the aggregate amount of exports from Africa and the value of those exports. So we increased diversification of product, but the EU actually has put more money into Africa through the imports. Through the imports that they receive and that they've created through their policies. So we may need to look at what we can do in terms of Africa to improve the depth and breadth of those exports in terms of total aggregate amount. How do we do that? Well, one of the first things is to really look at the areas in which both parties benefit.
Yeah, the quality. Shelton, can you do me a favor, please? Can you go and check your email right now? Because someone just sent me some instructions and I just did something. See if you're able to jump for another 5 minutes. Check your email because this connection is not really working well. Can you do that while you're on the phone?
Okay, I can do that
Yeah,
now.
check. Sorry, guys.
Email. See if it's any different.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be call over the internet.
Because I just sent you another link or confirmation as a participant, as a panelist.
I think I saw.
Aha, awesome. Thank you, guys.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Ellington, for that instruction. Appreciate it. Okay, here you go. Shelton, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, 1 second. I'm trying to have an echo. I want to turn that off.
So you have like 5 more minutes, I'm sorry. And just speak to how, you know, the Biden-Harris ticket can really maybe improve AGOA rather, or maybe come up with another Africa trade bill that really benefits, you know, the continent and the diaspora. So we don't have that much time, so you can just zero in on that. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I've just turned this off. Awesome. Okay, so we cannot hear you now. I think you're muted. Shelton, can you hear me? We cannot hear you. We can't hear you. Okay. Same thing with so Shelton, we might have to move on here. Okay. So apologies with this technology, but I think I think I see Dr. Badiwa Williams. Dr. Badiwa, I don't see you in the waiting room, but I think I saw you.
I am here.
Oh, please, would you please welcome and thank you so much. Please go ahead with your presentation. I'm sorry, let me just give some background. I'm really sorry. Give me 1 quick second while I change screen. So just a brief introduction. Dr. Badiwa Adejugbe Williams, the General Manager, African Film Village International, and she's based in Abuja. She's also coordinator of the Nigerian Diaspora Investment Summit, which aims to attract diaspora and foreign direct investment into MSMEs in Nigeria. She's the founder of Royal School of Educational Therapy Foundation. Dr. Badiwa, thank you so much for joining. Dr. Adejugbe Williams, thank you so much for joining us. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My presentation is basically in 3 parts. I'll give an overview of the Nigerian creative sector, followed by what pertains in Hollywood, and finally, what we expect from the Biden-Harris administration. The Nigerian creative industry, which includes fine arts, stage, fashion, media, and the film industry, and that is popularly known as Nollywood, is undoubtedly one of the fastest growing industries in the world, and its tremendous global impact is unquestionable. When we add hospitality and sports, the potential is enormous. The Nigerian entertainment industry is by and large one of the sectors that accounted for the rebasing of the Nigerian economy and pushed it up to be the biggest economy in Africa. Also, worthy of note is the global interest in Africa and the African culture, as these African elements are some of the attraction draws in a lot of theme parks and zoos all over the world today. And of course, Wakanda Forever, the movie. So now, according to the Guardian newspaper in Nigeria, in 2018, the arts, entertainment, and recreation industry represented 0.21% of Nigeria's GDP at a value of nearly 270 billion naira, which is almost equivalent to $1 billion. In the first quarter of 2019 alone, the industry garnered approximately 87 billion, which accounted for 0.27% of the economy of the country's GDP. The Nigerian box office also contributes significant value to the nation's economy. In 2017 alone, 4.3 billion was realized, and it is expected to grow to an estimated 6.4 billion by the year 2022. Nollywood, if some of you are familiar with it, if you are not, you really need to check it out. It produces about 50 movies per week, and it earns between 500 million to $1 billion US dollars annually. The reason why the gap is that much is because not all of the revenues are reported and have been captured with the data. So for all we know, it could potentially, maybe it has even grown beyond $1 billion annual returns. It has been identified as the second employing arm of the nation. And its position is being second is being contested by the agriculture sector. This is also being preceded by the Nigerian government. Suffice to say, though, the creative industry has the capacity to transform the economic outlook of Nigeria, in that the sector impacts all sectors of the economy. It creates direct and indirect labor from it and all its ancillary industries. The Nigerian film industry is a formidable industry. It is considered a giant in Africa, also the second wave of the economic arm of Nigeria. Industry experts, which also include the United Nations Education and Scientific Organization, known as UNESCO, they said that Nollywood, the viability of the industry is enormous. It has been rated at different times, sometimes as the second, sometimes third, sometimes first movie producing nation in the world, only surpassed by Bollywood. So really, Nollywood has surpassed Hollywood in its capacity to produce movies. In concurrence with UNESCO's findings, others have found that Hollywood is a dominating force in West Africa. So Nollywood is to be contested with. It is also interesting to know that outside of Africa as a continent, the United States of America is one of the largest consumers of Nollywood movies, especially with a high population of Africans in the United States. Netflix, among other online platforms, already have a dedicated website for Nollywood movies and television programs. There are currently about 40 Nollywood movies on Netflix. Without a doubt, Nollywood is the fastest movie producing nation in the world. As Nigeria now diversifies its economy from oil, the entertainment industry is one of the top sectors with the greatest economic value that will enhance the economy of the nation. The advantage of the sector includes the elements of being multi-genre. You also have the music, movie, stage, media, fashion, all encompassed. It's multicultural with all the different ethnic groups in Nigeria. It's multilingual, about 250 distinct languages and more. So it is worthy to note that this is an industry that should be recognized by all administrations all over the world. Now, the second part of my presentation is on Hollywood. We all know that Hollywood sells the United States of America much more than its State Departments, more than its embassies or Ministry of Foreign Affairs or United States Information Agency. What we know about United States today is really gleaned from what we've seen in its movies. So there's no doubt that the desire to tour America is for the most part fueled by the impressions, whether real or not, that are created by Hollywood movies. In line with the common knowledge of assumption, or assumption if you would call it that, is that Hollywood is actually partnering with the US government. Why am I saying this? It appears that Hollywood uses movies as an antecedent to sensitizing the public about potential future events, especially its plans in Africa. Movies are used to encourage, movies we know encourage willing suspension of disbelief, suspended beliefs of the surreal. They are used as a way to send subliminal messages and to build traction in guiding our belief system, the way we think and the way we interact with each other and with our communities. Science fiction and even animated movies are examples. The current pandemic was already shot in a movie called Contagion, starring Gwyneth Paltrow, even before we heard of COVID-19. And you know, The Simpsons also predicted Donald Trump's presidency back in 2000. So you now see the connection with what can be achieved with the movie industry. There are more movies that have predicted future events, such as Blade Runner, The Cable Guy, Super Mario Brothers, You've Got Mail, Minority Report, Back to the Future, The Truman Show, and Total Recall. So there are movies that are also set in Africa that are made in Hollywood as ways of raising our consciousness. And from these, we drive social and political activism about events in Africa. Such movies as The Last King of Scotland, Gorillas in the Mist, Blood Diamond, The Constant Gardener, and all the movies made about the late president of South Africa. Now, so you see that creative industry is a vehicle for engagement. So we are pushing and we're seeking that the Biden administration, what we really need in Nigeria, that will also cover Africa, though we don't want a one-size-fits-all approach, what we need is a policy of engagement that will engage all 54 countries in Africa. We want formalized access to the US market and knowledge exchange. We want policies that are engaging. US should connect and explore with all 54 countries of Africa. We need proper representation and branding of Africa's creative arts. We want to brand Africa in a way that will contrast what was done in the past. We need protection of policies that make provision for the protection of trademarks of African arts in the US. We want licensing and proper representation of the continent, simple. But to achieve this, there are some other things we need to consider. They are the copyright laws and protection, policies that make provision for the protection of trademarks, licensing and proper representation of the continent, proper branding of the continent, the insecurity issues that are paramount in a lot of African countries, actually really globally. But Nigeria has been identified as one of the top nations that are really, really negatively impacted by terrorism. We also need to look at financing. I'm so happy to hear a lot of people on this panel discussing investment in Africa. Financing is critical. And as the Nigerian Diaspora Investment Summit is about to commence its third year, we're really hoping we will be able to encourage Africans, friends of Africa, and Nigerians in the diaspora to come, participate, and invest in Nigeria and thus in Africa. We need to look at the issues of web connectivity. Some of us in Nigeria connecting to this webinar have been quite a challenge. So we need to look at that issue in relation to what we're talking about with the Harris-Biden administration. then of course the systemic corruption, not only within Africa, but about all the stolen African funds that are being housed in the United States. Also the unfair financial practices in the continent. A lot of things we found in Nigeria is that, the US or the USM, they charge Nigerians much more than other nations for such items as the visa, even exchanging money, going through Western Union to send money to Nigeria. We get the short end of it because we are paying double taxation in Nigeria. We also want to seek that Biden's policy on immigration should be fairer than Trump's. Also, the 4-year visa ban for student visas. I know that a lot of African countries will be impacted with this new Trump's policy. So Trump's ban on Nigerian immigrants and African immigrants really should be lifted. Africans in the US suffer the same fate as African Americans on race issues. So we like fairer policies that should be implemented by the Federal Civil Rights Intervention. All lives matter, but Black lives really, really do matter, as they have not been mattering much from what we've been seeing. A final request, it would be highly honored if the Biden-Harris administration will look into is apologies for slavery. And if they can also have this, they can distribute a repatriation to all families, just like they did with the Jews and the Japanese. So these are like a tall order, but if fulfilled, it will go a long way in building the nation. When I talk about the nation, I talk about the United States of America. And it will also open doors for greater opportunities for the African continent, opportunities for further engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Badiwa Williams. Okay, our last speaker for this session is, give me a quick sec. Our last speaker for this session is Ellington Arnold. Ellington currently is the Entrepreneurship Officer at the U.S. African Development Foundation, USADF. It leads the agency's engagement with young African innovations to invest grant capital in entrepreneurs who are starting up and growing businesses and social ventures that are impacting their communities and countries. Ellington also oversees the agency's partnership with the City Foundation that is directly supporting entrepreneurs. Formerly, he was a program analyst for the Nigerian Country Program and the Somalia Youth Program that focuses on matching skills training with job placement and small business startups. Previously, he worked in Senegal and Kenya on grassroots health and economic inclusion projects. Ellington is a New York native and a graduate of the University of Virginia. Thank you so much, Ellington. It's good to have you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And again, thank you to the United African Coalition for inviting me. And thank you to all my fellow panelists. I'm honored to share the same virtual stage as you all. I don't want to talk too long. I think a lot has been said. I simply want to build off what has been shared. So a lot of my experience in regard to Go and Yali comes from the Yali side of things. In my work, I fund a lot of young African entrepreneurs, and we source them through Yali primarily. And I kind of want to build off a few things, especially what Dana said in the beginning about kind of the missing middle. And we have a lot of entrepreneurs, and they're at varying stages. I think some of the previous panelists hinted at that some are young, they have ideas, but some actually do run viable companies. And they always have this issue of access to capital. How do they scale up? And so to date, in my time at the agency since about 2014, we've funded over 300 ventures in 35 different countries throughout the continent. So we've done ideation phase ventures in Senegal to agro-processing companies in Mauritius. So there's a wide range of investments. And all these investments really have a profound impact on them because most of these companies we fund are actually already cash positive, but they are not able to invest in themselves, maybe because they can't get access to finance via banks or other programs. So this is definitely an issue, and it's been well acknowledged. And I believe it was Gene Adams who was mentioning how we need to have a macro approach. Because you're right, what is great is when OPIC or DFC says they can get $8 billion to the continent, but it's also how are they going to do this? A lot of those programs come in $300 million loans or funding, but that does not get to the average African citizen. So how do we directly connect with them? So I know the work that I've done is funding these young African entrepreneurs directly. So let's kind of cut out the middleman. Let's only work with grassroots organizations that oversee African-led ventures for African communities. So I know that is one way that I'm trying to kind of address that missing middle. And I've been fortunate enough too to speak with the Biden campaign on quite a few of their policies going forward. And I think everyone on this call is in agreement. The current administration in the White House doesn't really have any type of policy towards Africa. There's not much intentionality on their side. They're not really looking at the opportunity that is presenting. So I think first off, the Biden administration and Harris, they will look to create a strategy, create intentionality that has been gone for these past few years. Little things that they can look to: raise travel bans. So having citizens travel easily from South Sudan or Nigeria, help with free trade. So I know AGOA, well, we all know it isn't perfect, but it has helped diversify in some ways, but how can we make something better? And one thing that I know I've talked with the campaign with is the idea of co-investment. Because you're right, and we've touched on this, that we simply use aid, that's not going to fix everything. And even the way that America approaches it, right? It's going to view it as simply giving money. But let's not give money, let's work together. How do we do co-investments? And that's something that the Biden-Harris campaign is really looking at, how to leverage diaspora. As was stated early on in the call, about like 40 million, or I forget the number, in remittances a year. It's actually more consistent than aid itself, is these remittances from diaspora to the continent. So clearly we have successful, amazing diaspora members here. So how do we leverage that? Maybe issue diaspora bonds to help fund projects in their country of origin. How do we help make access to capital? How do we connect businesses in the United States directly to entrepreneurs in Africa to help source the materials or outsource technical assistance, whatever that is? And I do know that is one thing that the Biden-Harris campaign is going to focus, and they need to focus on, is how do we make these connections? How do we really leverage the diaspora? Because there's so much opportunity, both here in the United States, but especially in Africa. And I think it's that co-curation together, that we're not simply giving aid, but how do we build things together in that co-investment?
Okay, is that it?
I'm good for now. Again, I know we were kind of going over. I don't want to repeat some of what panelists already said, but.
Thank you so much. It's really great to have you. So on this note, I know Assemblyman Michael Blake is going to join us. I just sent him an email again. So, but I'm going to hand over to my co-host, Stephanie, and also co-founder of the United African Coalition, Stephanie Arthur. And to the second list of panelists, thank you so much for your patience. We really appreciate it. So everyone, please hang around so that we can have a Q&A, after this. Stephanie, please go ahead.
Sure, thank you, Bukola. Hi, everyone. I know it's, a little gloomy here in DC. I'm not sure how it is looking everywhere else, but I want to thank everybody for their patience, for sitting through the first panel. It was an excellent discussion. Thank you, Bukola, for hosting it. All of the panelists on panel one, I believe, offered a wealth of information and knowledge that I think, and possible solutions that I think will hopefully help the new administration, the Biden-Harris team, look beyond aid and look to developing innovative ways to address international relations, social impact through investing and not aid, and really, I guess, expand the conversation around the brain drain, really invest in the talent that's on the continent. For the second panel, we wanted to talk more about domestic policy, because I think when people hear or think about the concerns that Africans have here in the diaspora, they point immediately to immigration and citizenship. And while in part that is true, there are domestic policies that I think are cross-pollinating to issues that we care about in terms of building our own, communities here in the diaspora, our generational wealth, education, health, issues that other Americans care about. We care about those same issues as well. So I wanted to make sure that the second panel discussed key areas around domestic policy to see where we can kind of potentially talk about what the Biden-Harris team could do to make, I think, if they get in, God willing, the new administration more beneficial to the African demographic. Before I get started though, I want to officially introduce myself. So my name is Stephanie Arthur, and I sit as the strategy and policy advisor with the UNAC team. And so our team is built up of 5 talented individuals: Bukola, that you met earlier, myself, Famoud Kone, who will be on my panel, Charles Cooper, who is our chairman and spoke earlier, and our other guest, our other board member, Ibrahima, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. Before I move forward, just a little housekeeping. Our chat room is open. I mean, I know people were helping with some of the Zoom logistics in terms of getting connected, but please feel free to use the chat to connect with the first panel. If you have some questions that weren't asked or you want to ask panelists, you can kind of answer those questions in the chat. Also introduce yourselves. Please feel free to share your contact information, because we hope that this conversation goes beyond this moment. The second thing that I do want to address is, as well as the format of what the second panel is going to look like. So first, I'm going to introduce all of the panelists by name and, by bio, and then give them an opportunity to talk very briefly about what they do in the capacity of their role, right? Before we get into some pointed questions about policy. Our hope is that post this conversation, post election day, into the new administration, that UNAC will develop a policy paper, both on international issues and domestic, based on what was discussed here and other conversations we'll have moving forward, that we can present to a new administration. So that is why it's important for us to continue to connect, because Ellington, may have some great ideas that weren't shared today that we could possibly put in our policy paper. I know Mr. Gene Adams, he always brings it. He's been working in the community college affairs space for a very long time. And so we want to be able to foster that dialogue from here moving forward. So I'm about to begin, and I don't have any particular order in which I am introducing my guests, the panelists. And so I will just start as I have it on my agenda, if that's okay. So I want to first introduce Miss Nsi Uftu, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. Please correct me if I have mispronounced it. I hate mispronouncing people's names.
It's Nsi Ufat.
She is a powerhouse attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia. She is a voter engagement turn-up activist, as I have called her. She's a voter engagement strategist, talks about voter suppression, and she uses creative ways to engage voters in Georgia with their civic responsibility, understanding their civic responsibility. She is a powerhouse and a force to be reckoned with in the Georgia landscape. She is of Nigerian descent and has, through her organization, where she sits as the chief executive officer, she has an ambitious goal of registering, I believe, 1 million voters, 800,000 to 1 million voters of color and young people. And so I open the floor up to you, Ms. Uftu, to kind of talk about yourself and the project and the capacity in which you sit with your organization. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and greetings, everyone. My name is Nsi Ufat, and I run an organization called the New Georgia Project. And yes, one of the, I think, primary tactics that we use, or the thing that we're best known for, is large-scale voter registration drives and trying to change the culture of voting and engagement here in the Deep South. I think the thing that is sort of unique and interesting about this particular moment that we're in is that Georgia is changing very rapidly, and will be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority. And unlike so the entire country is browning, and there's a massive demographic shift underway. I think the thing that is unique about Georgia is that unlike a similar state, Arizona, for example, that is headed towards a people of color majority, is that the demographic shifts that are happening in Georgia are being driven particularly by what demographers and political scientists are calling the reversal of the Great Migration. So between the 1920s, 1970s, Black Americans fled the South, fleeing racialized violence and in search of economic opportunities, which is why, you know, you can take the Black folks in Chicago and trace their roots to Mississippi, you know, Black people in New York and New Jersey and trace their roots to the Carolinas, et cetera, et cetera. It's also being driven by African and Caribbean immigration. And so it has created an opportunity for us to organize and to build independent political infrastructure that's designed to, you know, drive change, but also for us to win and defend those wins beyond one election cycle. So what that looks like for the New Georgia Project is today we've registered almost 500,000 Black and Brown Georgians in all 159 of Georgia's counties. And so I know that the work that we do and the work of our partners has fundamentally changed not only the conversation, but what the opportunity looks like and what the electoral landscape looks like in a place like Georgia. And so I'm really happy to sort of lean in and to talk about how we do what we do, how we partner with binational chambers of commerce. So, you know, Nigerian American organizations, the Jamaican American organizations that exist that are a part of a broader immigrant, economic, social justice landscape here in the state of Georgia, and how folks get activated in an organic way that is sustainable, that will allow us to, you know, have the policy conversations and the political conversations that are necessary to build a better Georgia, to build a South, and to ultimately move the country forward.
Thank you, thank you. So our next panelist is a young lady. I think she represents maybe the millennial demographic, maybe Gen Z. Her name is Fatah Akoy. Fatah, are you there? I can't hear you.
I said, yes, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Oh, okay, great. So Ms. Fatah Akoy is a 2020 graduate of George Washington University, where she earned her Master's of International Affairs in Student Government at GW. She recently served as a research consultant for the African Union, researching the potential impact of African free continental trade area on US FDI on the continent. In 2019, she served as the diaspora, millennial liaison for the Embassy of Ghana, where she worked on projects such as the Ghana's Year of the Return, which was really successful last year. In 2018, Fatah started her own nonprofit called Take Back Africa, the Take Back Africa Foundation, which is made up of young African millennials. So I got it right, she's part of the millennial demographic, living in the diaspora with one goal in mind: to improve the socioeconomic status of the continent. So I know, Fatah, we both sit on the African Diaspora for Biden National Steering Committee. And since, you know, being a part of it, she is literally an organizer to her core, understands the young African demographic here in the diaspora, and what their interests are, their voting needs are, what their civic needs are. She's a champion for civic engagement for the young African demographic. She has also worked for Hillary for America, so she has a lot of campaign experience. She has engaged the Black community in Minnesota as well. And she was a voter recruiter for former Senator Al Franken's campaign. So the floor is yours, Fatah. You have the opportunity to discuss the capacity in which you work on the African Diaspora for Biden campaign, National Steering Committee, and what you do on the ground in terms of engaging Africans through civic responsibility and civic conversation.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fata Akwe. Like she said, I'm a millennial, a Liberian millennial from the state of Minnesota, but now I'm out in the DMV area. I am a community organizer, I would say an activist and lobbyist. My capacity, most of the work that I do is really engaging in grassroots work on the ground, having conversations with our community, actually seeing where are policy issues that our community members care about. A lot of my training came from campaign work, political organizing, when I organized with Al Franken in 2014. From then kind of transitioned into Black Lives Matter Minnesota, doing a lot of marches, stuff for Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, Philando Castile, Jamar Clark. And then just bringing the African perspective voice to that campaign and making sure that Africans see ourselves reflected in the movement, that we are a part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and what that means for Blackness not being a monolith. And then basically transitioned from there to working for African Immigrant Services. That's where I really got my core. A lot of the work that I did was on education reform, especially with, I'm Liberian, and Minnesota has the largest Liberian population outside of Liberia. So that's pretty huge. And so basically organizing my community on issues such as health equity, issues such as economic stability, economic equity for small businesses, and then on education reform. So working on things like Osceola area schools where most West Africans stay, their first ever racial equity policy. From there, we transitioned into working on their first ever health and wellness policy to help bring foods from our communities, foods that we would want reflected in our students' nutrition to the school system, which was unheard of. In that space. And then I transitioned into immigration reform. And that's kind of where I really got my head start for the work that I'm doing now. And so focusing on immigration reform issues, I served as the leading lobbyist for Liberians on DED. So I was the national lobbyist for the Liberian Fairness and Refugee Act that just got signed in 2019, granting Liberians on deferred and forced departure a pathway to citizenship. And so most of my work comes from there. Like she said, I'm a community organizer. And so I always want my ear to the ground, always want to know what the community is thinking about the issues. Most of the time we have people who kind of speak on behalf of the community, but our community is evolving. And there's a lot of issues on the ground that are not being discussed in policy spaces. And so I serve as that, in that capacity, using my ability to bring those issues to the forefront with policymakers and lawmakers, especially on Capitol Hill. And so a lot of the work that I do is reflecting that on those issues. And so, yeah, our work with the African Diaspora for Biden Steering Committee, I helped organize the Pennsylvania webinar as well as the Minnesota Candidate Forum, which was the first time that Minnesota African diasporan candidates were able to all be on a platform to talk about issues that they're running on and why they support the Biden-Harris administration. And so that was really important to organize that with Attorney General Keith Ellison, who I've worked with in the past, as well as other Minnesota state legislatures. And then Pennsylvania as well. Also, I work on the communications team, so kind of helping brand and rebrand the strategy of how we're actually reaching out to young voters, especially young African millennials who are being left out of the conversation. Most of the times these are being planned by the older generation, and they're failing to really reach the core of the issues that we're facing now, especially first and second generation African immigrants. And so basically being able to bridge that divide and have conversations on that. And yeah, Stephanie brought up my organization, Take Back Africa. I'll end with that. That's my baby. Take Back Africa is focused on, you know, a lot of us here, especially African millennials, we have this passion and purpose to want to do something about Africa, want to do something about back home, but we don't know how to apply ourselves. Where do we see fit? And so the organization is really a network where we bring together African entrepreneurs, African nonprofits, African for-profits to come to the table and have conversation on policy, have conversation on issues of agriculture, on economics, issues of health equity, and things like that, and then use that that to connect people on the ground with projects that are actually going on, and see how they can best apply the skills and abilities that they've learned from the US to issues back home. And so we're our second year. Our first summit, we teamed up with the State Department, and so did a lot of work with the U.S. State Department on bridging that gap with ambassadors and the African millennial generation. And so, yeah, we're in our third year. We're excited. We're virtual because of COVID, but we're excited for what is there to come. And so I'm excited to be on this panel to talk about African millennials and young voters and what that really means for the hopefully incoming administration.
Thank you, Fatah. So our next panelist is Mr. Akindele Akinyemi. He is one of the African community's most respected educators on educational reform through organizational leadership, ethics, management, and change, and how we view educational business. Akinyemi is a hard-hitting educator, motivational speaker. He's also a researcher, and he's also a government relations expert. He's widely known for his tough line views on educational reform. He likes to link global policy to empower local communities here in the US. And, you know, he is actually I believe the organizer, the sole organizer, that's how I was introduced to him, for One Voice Africa. So One Voice Africa is this wonderful collective of African nonprofit organizations here who plan events during CBC, week, policy events that are going to have us having a discussion outside of the Africa Grain Trust that we know that the Congressional Black Caucus hosts every year. And so through his platform, he's been able to open up a broader discussion around faith, around civics, in education, as well as U.S.-Africa trade, to allow other organizations to be at the table, having those conversations amongst each other, but also with the larger U.S. community. And so lastly, I'll just say this, that Mr. Akinyemi is the president and CEO of the Global African Business Association, GABA. He has a BS in African American Studies, and he attended Eastern Michigan University. He's based out of, I believe, Detroit, Michigan, or the state of Michigan, and is an active participant in African civics here in the diaspora. And so, Akinyemi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and I just want to say greetings to everyone on this panel. It is true that I am the president and CEO of the Global African Business Association. We started in 2014, right in Inkster, Michigan. Now, before I get into just a little bit about my background, actually, just a point of correction. I mean, I appreciate the accolades, but One Voice actually started with NAPAC, which is the other organization I belong to, which I serve as their national political director. It started, the Nigerian American Public Affairs Committee was originally the ones that originated the One Voice platform. And my team, GABA, and of course, eventually the Ghana Diaspora Pact kind of joined in with NAPAC, and this is what we've been doing. It's the first year we've done it online because of COVID. But I just wanted to point out a little correction, just in case anybody else is looking at this on this live Zoom.
I gave you all the credit. You started.
That's okay though, but that's all right though. I mean, I'm the face of this right now. No, listen, GABA started in 2014. Myself and Rariana Make, who is my co-pilot, my executive vice president, we started GABA as a business support business education network. We started it right here in Inkster, Michigan. Inkster, Michigan is 6 square miles, 25,000 residents. It's about 10 miles west of Detroit. It is the largest African-American community outside of Detroit in Western Wayne County, Michigan, 5 minutes from the airport. And the reason why we chose Inkster was because what we realized about a lot of business associations and Chamber of Commerces is that most of the time, those entities are not linked to a particular municipality for economic development. And so what we wanted to do is test that theory. And we started testing that theory by getting appointed to the various boards and commissions in the city of Inkster. I actually was the president for 4 years of the Inkster Downtown Development Authority and the Inkster Economic Development Corporation. And I was elected to the Inkster Library Board. Now, there's only been 4 Nigerians ever elected anywhere in the state of Michigan. I just happen to be the 4th. And so I spent 4 years on the library board. We helped build a $1.8 million brand new library project. It was a very intensive and a very in some cases, unfortunately, political project. Now, the reason I joined that particular library board was one major reason. Inkster lost its school district back in 2013. And so by the state of Michigan, they dissolved the school board. And so I joined the library board because I wanted to restore education. Now, the way I wanted to restore education, though, was to create more of a global educational component and rooted into the city of Inkster. So that was always my strategy of joining the library board. One of the key strategies in creating a library system as a form of education. And we've been rocking and rolling here in the state of Michigan ever since. We do have hubs in Nebraska, Georgia, New York, the DMV, of course, and then we have our ambassadors in Nigeria. She was on here earlier. I think she left. Nigeria, Cameroon, and Mozambique. And so what we do is we try to do B2B. We link the wealth between local municipalities, which is my strong focus on cities, and the continent of Africa. And the reason you hear me talk more about this in the dialogue about cities, because we have to use that as a form of incubation to create an impact with our diaspora in general. And that's what we try to stress a lot in GABA. Have deep relationships with both Democrat and Republicans. We have a love-hate relationship with one another, but we still all love each other at the end of the day, especially as it pertains to U.S.-Africa policy, U.S.-Africa immigration, and issues like that. And so I could be long-winded about what we do in GABA. We are a success story. We've been around the last 6 years. We help people set up their businesses, business funding, financial literacy, financial empowerment. That's what we do on education end. And then we just talk to our local leaders about why you play a role in this whole 21st century global movement within the African diaspora. We help them to understand the importance that they play a role in so that their cities and their local communities can become successful as well within the framework of the 21st century.
Okay, so thank you. So I'll just move on to our next panelist, Ms. Diana Konate, who is a policy director with Africans Community Together. A lot of us have worked with our organization. She is here in her personal capacity, but prior to being the policy director for ACT, she worked on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, with the House of Representatives on the House side doing legislative work. She was a legislative aide for Congressman Bill Foster. While as a congressional staff, Diana also served as the president of the Congressional African Staff Association. So let me just tell you, I've moved down to DC for I've been here short of 2 years, and there's a lot of talented Africans playing on Capitol Hill. Just for anybody who can hear me, that is a resource for us. We have smart legislative professionals that can help us with policy on the Hill and have the direct ear of congressional representatives. So I just wanted to point that out. She has a JD from Michigan State University College of Law. She has a bachelor's in political science from Old Dominion University. She lives here in the DC area, and her and I also sit on the National Steering Committee for Africans for Biden. Very smart policy professional. And so Diana, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Stephanie. And thanks everybody for joining us here today and for allowing me to join on the panel. So just to give a little background about the work that I do in the organization, just as information, again, I'm here as I'm in my personal capacity, but I am policy director at African Communities Together, as Stephanie mentioned. And what the organization does is we provide direct legal services to African immigrants in the communities where we operate. So right now we have a chapter in New York. We have a DC chapter, which has offices in DC and Virginia, and we do some work in Maryland. We also train our members. We're a membership-based organization, so we train our members to become civic leaders. We organize them around issues that are of importance to them. And we do federal advocacy. We also do state and local advocacy, but I'm involved in the federal advocacy. And in my role, what I do is ensure that the interests of African immigrants are considered when federal immigration policy is being discussed. Making sure that, for example, folks aren't trying to trade away the diversity visa program when they are discussing how to create paths to citizenship for other communities. So that's basically what I do. Some of the issues that I have been working on include TPS, temporary protected status. I've worked on DED, which is a program that Fata just mentioned. Also working on the law that came into effect at the end of last year, the LRIF, the Liberian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act, and the government's implementation of that. I deal with diversity visa issues. So any areas of immigration law that impacts Africans. And before my work here, as Stephanie mentioned, I was on the Hill. I worked for Congressman Bill Foster from Illinois. But one of the things that I did while I was there was as the staffer was with the Congressional African Staff Association. It's a staff association made up generally of African staffers. I think in the beginning, it was more so geared towards African staffers and creating a space for African staffers on the Hill to come together to fellowship and to be really involved in discussions around US-Africa policy. As the years went on, it was opened up to more staffers. So not just African staffers, but staffers on the Hill that had a real interest in US-Africa policy. So what we did with the organization was try to make sure that Africa wasn't an issue that was on the back burner, as we know that it tends to be a lot of the time. So what we tried to do was bring organizations onto the Hill to provide briefings on various topics that were timely. So that's something that I did while I was on the Hill. We really had a lot of success. We brought a lot of folks onto the Hill, people who might not have had an opportunity otherwise to come to the Hill and basically talk to lawmakers, talk to staffers about what the issues were within their communities, whether it be here in the US, but generally on the continent. So that's, a little bit background on me. I am Ivorian. I was born in Ivory Coast, but I consider myself a Liberian because my mom is Liberian and she raised us, within the Liberian community. So, so I consider myself a Liberian, but so that's a little background on me.
I mean, there's too many Liberians here. Where the Ghanaians? Where the Ghanaians? Come on, Liberians and Nigerians, that kind of dominate. Y'all flex, you guys flex too much. No, okay, so our last and final panelist, and we're running out of time, so I'll be quick with this, is Mr. Famoud Kone, who is a colleague of mine, who is also part of UNAC, is a dynamic professional. Just want to read a little bit about his bio. He currently sits as the Deputy Director of Strategic Partnerships for the New York City Census, and prior to that, He was the Bronx Borough Director for Mayor Bill de Blasio, who's our current mayor in New York City. He's also the African liaison to the mayor's office. In his capacity, he has served as a representative of the mayor to the Bronx, as well as throughout the whole 5 boroughs, actually. He's also worked for the district attorney's office and the governor's office. He is city government, state government professional, and has always been able to link those offices back to the African community. The African community has always been his core. I've known him for a long time and the work that he's done. And so we're interested in hearing from you, Famoud. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you to everyone. Kudos to you and the entire team for organizing this event. I'm sorry for my appearance. I'm on the road, actually. I didn't want to tell the team that, but I had to, come down here in my mom's basement to get on this conference call. I know you asked me specifically to talk about the census and how the census is helping to get African different ethnicity in the census. So I'm going to first talk about work in New York City, since that's the capacity that I worked in and what we've done with the.
So you could just give a quick byline about your role, and then I'll have the pointed questions to you shortly after.
Okay, good.
And he's another Liberian too, so Liberians are dominating this whole conference call. But go ahead.
Yeah. So my role, you mean my role at the census or just my, okay.
Your role at the census and what you're doing.
Right, so personally, I took on the role at the New York City Census. So just so you know, historically, the city has never had a census office before. This is the first time. As all of you know, census is a federal effort, is a federal effort. It's not a city or state effort. But the reason why Mayor Bill de Blasio created this city effort around census, because 10 years ago, our self-response rate was 62%. And because of that, we lost funding, billions of dollars, and we also lost a congressional seat. So fast forward 10 years, the mayor said, well, this is not going to happen on my watch. I'm not going to lose funding, and I'm not going to lose a congressional seat. And I'm going to create an office, because he believed the reason why we didn't respond well to the census because there was not sufficient awareness. And I can speak to that because 2010, I was in New York. I didn't hear anything about the census. So the mayor went ahead and created NYC Census 2020. And our office is led by Julie Manny, who is also the commissioner of the mayor's office of entertainment. And we have an incredible diverse team of folks. So my role as deputy director for strategic partnership is to work with different organizations, private, public organizations, bring them into the work of the census, including community-based organizations, so that we can all work together as a team to get the city counted in the census accurately.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so then we'll just transition right now into the pointed questions. I know we're, close to our time. And so my first question actually is going to be for Akindele. Okay, Akindele, are you there?
I am.
Wonderful. Okay, so my first question to you is this, that the Senate Joint Committee states that foreign-born workers are key contributors to the U.S. economy, right? And so we are 17% Africans make up part of the foreign-born workers. We're 17% of the labor force. We're 1/4 of the population creating new businesses. We provide manpower. We are essential workers. We are on the front lines of the healthcare system. We're on the front lines of the healthcare system, the hospitality, industry, food services. We essentially a lot of our African immigrants didn't get a chance to be quarantined, essentially, because they had to go to work, and faced with the challenge, if they didn't go to work, they didn't get a check. And so for those businesses, I wonder, through your experience, have those businesses been able to receive the federal funding and the municipal, any state funding at the level that other businesses have been able to receive? And so in terms of the PPP, the Payment Protection Program, as well as their ability to receive any funding to keep their businesses afloat, What is your take on that?
Absolutely not. I mean, this administration is a complete disaster. Um, I'm talking about the Trump administration, total disaster, a train wreck, an embarrassment. You have a lot of African immigrant businesses that didn't receive PPP. We know there were some language barriers there. We know there were some other issues there, some technical issues. For the most part, it's just like African American businesses didn't receive PPP. That's all by design. But you know, and you know, in other state and federal funding, there were some barriers there. So we heard the horror stories. We try to help people navigate the process on our end through our networks and try to get them that money. For the most part, we didn't hear about any of that stuff. See, the thing is about African immigrant businesses is that they play a key role into building tax bases within local communities. That's important. We have to understand that they play a huge role in lowering unemployment in our community. They play a big role in boosting tax base. They play a big role in creating a synergy that some communities just don't have. That's where we talk about linking the wealth. We have to link the wealth between the U.S. and Africa. And the thing is that this administration, I don't understand. Just this week, this administration announced through DHS, I believe, they one more time want to go after international students in terms of that. Now, international students, and this time they're really focusing on Africa. This international students bring billions of dollars into universities every year. And from there, they graduate and they use OPT, CPT to work in the workforce, create their own businesses, or just create a system of sustainability within communities that just don't have that. And this is an administration right now that's going after international students. Now, back in July, they wanted to try an okey doke with that. They got sued and he backed off. Now here they come again with another okey doke. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so the thing is, when we're looking at African businesses, African immigrant businesses from a federal level, we got to give them the support they need. We know organizations, I believe the African Development Center in Minneapolis, they're set up as a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution, to help with loans and things of that nature. We have to start being more engaged, my team included, to be more engaged in that kind of process to give the support that they need for these African-based businesses. That's very important. The other thing I want to point out real fast, so I know we're short on time, is this EB-5 system. The EB-5 is a very important investor visa. The EB-5 is critically important when you're talking about foreign direct investment from the continent into local urban communities here in the United States. That's important because what we're trying to do here is use cities as an incubator to create empowerment within our community. And the EB-5 investor visa program is a big step with that to move that process forward. I want to point that out. That's something that this particular administration hates. That's why they're pushing opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are good if you have the money, but it doesn't lead to permanent residency like the EB-5 investor visa program. So I wanted to point those things out and point out the contrast between what a Biden-Harris administration should be working towards in terms of economic empowerment for African immigrants, but that also comes from our congressmen and our congresswomen, as well as our senators, to be the liaisons for us to vouch in front of a Biden-Harris administration. And Stephanie, you don't have to take a deep sigh too much, because we'll make sure that Biden and Harris get across the finish line in November, as long as we get out there and vote. So we have to do our due diligence as a people. But once they get in there, we have these conversations with them in terms of our congressional reps understanding our issues and not looking at Africa as a social justice, a cultural or security issue, but also an economic issue that can benefit their own constituency and their own communities. I think we can move forward from there.
So what they're saying is that certain businesses will not be able to come back after post-COVID because they just can't afford to, some of the mom pop shops. What is it going to take in terms of like loans, or where could we find the loans to be able to help African businesses that may be on the brink of closing for good because they just can't stay open given this time?
I think one of the things we need to take a look at is, let's look at what's in our community already. We have Black banks within our community. Have we talked to those Black banks about the situations with African small mom and pop businesses? Have we talked about CDFIs? I think one of the things we need to pay attention to is some of the things and some of the institutions that exist in our community. I think we need to engage them more. From my personal experience as a president and CEO of GABA, is when I talk to some of these financial institutions, they just simply don't know what's going on because they're just not engaged, not because they don't want to be engaged. No one's ever talked to them about that. I think we need to create some type of dialogue and some educational pieces to put in place to help them understand that these people need assistance, these people need support, and so these businesses won't fall apart. I think also I think we need to move some of these businesses into the 21st century in terms of e-commerce. E-commerce plays a big role, especially in the 21st century as it pertains to the fourth industrial revolution. E-commerce is going to play a huge role in the way we do business, even in financial technology. With now you have this thing, cryptocurrencies coming into play. I mean, so I think one of the things we have to do on our end internally is start looking at things differently as a community in terms of how we do business and how we execute business within the community as in terms of services. But also I think we need an educational component to link with what already exists within our community with institutions and things, so that we can all create that ecosystem and that synergy to move us forward.
Thank you so much. So my next question is for you, Diana, and this is in reference to immigration policy. So what I've witnessed at the start of campaign season, before Biden announced Harris, but just how the Biden campaign was kind of navigating, they really weren't stumping on immigration issues, right? And so they really weren't explicit about talking about DACA, DAPA, the border. And, you know, some say it's because they don't want to piss off some voters that they're trying to take from the Trump administration or the Trump support base. And then recently I just saw that Biden now introduced 2 immigration initiatives in order to appeal or patronize to the Latino voter base, right? And so if I'm an African, and I am an African, and I see that there's no explicit campaigning around immigration issues that impact me or my family or that I care about, then what is the incentive to then now go vote, right? If you're not directly speaking to my demographic, but you've now created space to speak to the Latino base. And I think before you answer, I think one of the misconceptions is that, you know, Africans are not voters. If we're naturalized, we're voters, right? We are raising, you know, children, American-born children who then become voters. And so I guess my question to you is, Diana, what is it going to take for the Biden-Harris campaign to be more appealing to the African voter? And then what policies should they address in, you know, if they win, that will do better to solve some of the issues that we've been finding in our community?
Sure.
That was long-winded, I'm sorry. I talk a lot.
No problem, no problem. I mean, I think that Democrats tend to not be as vocal as immigration on immigration, I think because, you know, they feel like it's an issue that they don't win on. But, you know, polls have shown that the American public is welcoming of immigrants. So I think that appealing to immigrants is the way to go. When it comes to the African immigrant population here in the US, I think that first we have to start with where we are right now and what the Trump administration has done to immigration policy here in the US. You know, he campaigned on, you know, getting illegal immigrants out of the US. But what he has really been doing and what he's really tried to do is totally change our legal immigration system, and really lessen the number of immigrants who are coming into this country. And it's really had a negative impact on African immigrants. You know, African immigrants tend to come into the US as refugees and asylees. So 30% of Africans who are coming into the US are doing so as refugees and asylum seekers. The current administration has taken refugee admissions from close to 100,000 under Obama to 18,000 last year. And this is in the middle of a refugee crisis globally. The administration is making it harder and harder for people to qualify for asylum. You know, and this impacts how people's status here in the US. With diversity visa, as we all know, he's been, you know, spreading lies about what the program is. He's been trying to do away with the program. Last year, they were successful in implementing a rule that had a detrimental impact on the Africans, you know, the ability of Africans to apply for the diversity visa. And diversity visa is a program that's very important to the African community, because 30% of the 55,000 visas that are available through the diversity visa, 30% of those go to Africans. So a lot of Africans are here in the US because of the diversity visa program. So he put in place a rule last year that, you know, severely cut down on the number of Africans who were able to apply. So in 2017, 11 million Africans applied. 2018, 10 million Africans applied. And then last year, it was 4 million because of his rule. This year, as you know, he suspended the diversity visa program. So effectively, nobody could come into the country through that program. Akindele mentioned this in his remarks. Yesterday, the administration just proposed a rule that would restrict student visas. And not surprisingly, 38 of the 54 African countries are on that list. You know, his policies have just had a detrimental effect on Africans being able to come into this country. As far as Africans who are in this country, he's done everything that he can to take away people's status. So he has terminated TPS for several countries, including Sudan. He has terminated DED for Liberia, and we had to fight to get it not reinstated, but to get it extended, and then fight for the LRIF program that passed in December. Implementation for that program has been disastrous. Of the 10,000 Liberians who are eligible for that program, only 2,000 have applied. USCIS has not done education that it needs to be doing on that program. You know, he has tried to do away with DACA. You know, he has made it harder for people to apply for green cards. He has intensified efforts to denaturalize people. I mean, this administration has just been terrible.
So, I was just going to say, so what you're saying is dovetailing into just a quick point, and if you could quickly answer this. So someone in the comments made a good point that part of the reason why no presidential candidate, but particularly the Biden-Harris ticket, have not pivoted towards patronizing us is because we're fragmented within our own community. So, I mean, that may be true, and that you can speak to that briefly, but something you said, right? We can talk about all the things that Trump has done. Absolutely. We know that, you know, he has espoused anti-immigrant rhetoric. He is not a friend of our communities. But how can a Biden-Harris ticket, but particularly Biden, convince us as Africans that he's an ally when people remember in the Obama administration that they had the highest deportation record? If you can speak to that really briefly, what is it going to take to convince us that we should vote for him up against what we have in Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point that under Obama there were significant deportations, but I also think if you look at the data, when Trump came into office, the percentage of Africans that were getting deported skyrocketed. I believe the first year he came into office, I want to say there was an 800% increase in the number of Senegalese that were deported. Last year there was, I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but there has been a significant increase in the number of Africans being deported. That impacts our communities. And I think that if you see where we are now, what the Biden-Harris ticket could do is really talk to our communities, tell them what's at stake, because there is a lot at stake, and then let them know what they intend to do. I mean, Biden. Biden has committed to reversing Trump's immigration policies, like reversing public charge, which is going to be making it harder for folks to get their green cards. He's committed to reuniting families. Trump recently put in a ban that prevents some US citizens and green card holders, prevents them from bringing some of their families into the country. He is committed to doing away with the Muslim ban and the African ban. I think that he needs to let our communities know that these are the things that he's going to be doing for the community. But immigration isn't the only issue that we care about. So, a lot of our folks are on the front lines working as essential workers during the pandemic. Biden has a plan for ensuring that we get through this pandemic. As the vice president during Obama's term, I think we actually saw what that administration was able to do coming out of the Great Recession and bringing the country back. So we have evidence of what Biden can do. Okay. But I think that what we really need is for his for Biden to be talking to our community so that we actually know what his plans are, because he does have plans, and the issue might be that folks don't feel like they're hearing from him.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So I'm going to pivot into my next question for the next panelist, but to Diana's point about Africans feeling not heard, what I've seen, and I'm not sure if other people on the call have seen, this growing number of Africans for Trump. I don't know where they've come from, but they are a groundswell. And I thought it was a gimmick initially, but no. There really is a groundswell of naturalized Africans who, are in the diaspora, who are supporting the Trump administration, in spite of all of his anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I'm just concerned, is his campaign or is his team going out to the African base more? Because he always talks about how he's done more for Black people than any other president, which we know is not true. But is something wrong with the messaging that is now bad on the Democratic side, and the Republican side has been able to capitalize off of better messaging? I'm not sure, but there is a faction out there, Africans for Trump, and I just didn't know if people knew that or were paying attention. Have you been seeing that? Just like 30 seconds. Have you seen that through your organizing and your work?
I mean, not necessarily through my work, but just personally. I have seen folks that are, pro-Trump, Africans that are pro-Trump. I'll say that a lot of what I've seen tends to be Africans who are more conservative. Just generally, they're more conservative. They tend to be more religious. And so they feel as though Trump aligns with them on their values.
Their core values.
And, you know, it's unfortunate because if Trump could have it their way, his way, they wouldn't be in this country.
Right. Like, I don't get it.
So, you know, it's really unfortunate. And I think there's also a lot of misinformation about what Trump is doing for the African community. So information, I think information and letting people know what he's really doing is what can combat some of that.
Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. So my next question is going to be for Fata. So what we're seeing is this new growing demographic of young African voters who are now more, I don't want to say more leftist, but they were more Bernie-crats. You know, those that I've come in contact with, you know, supported the Bernie campaign, were really about social justice, you know, Medicare for all. And given the current climate with the racial tension and the social unrest, young Africans are seeing themselves in this movement, right? And so through some of the discussions that I've had and some of the readings that I've done, a lot of them have not necessarily been impressed or excited. Excited is the better word, excited about the Democratic ticket. And I guess my question to you, Fata, is what is it going to take to excite the young African voter? Because that is an emerging demographic. They don't necessarily share the same ideals as their parents, right? And so they are Black Lives Matter folks, just like you are, and are movement folks. And, you know, what will it take to get them on board with this new Democratic ticket?
I'll preface before I get into my argument, I guess, for why or how the administration, the Biden-Harris campaign can really touch young African voters. But I want to preface by saying just in general, what the misunderstanding people have is like what a president should be. You know, in general, we should talk about what a president should be, which is in the middle. You do not want a president too far left and too far right. I feel like most of the argument has been shaped on, okay, you know, the Biden administration isn't really tackling so far left to be able to pull all of the leftists in, or he's too moderate. And it's like a president should be moderate because a president should encompass all Americans, regardless if they're Democrat or Republican, independent, Green Party, whatever they should be. That's what I see a leader should be. And that's the leader I think that we should aspire to have for our country.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Fata. We do have a guest that's been trying to get on for a few moments now. We have the Honorable Michael Blake with us. And I just wanted to make some brief remarks. Mr. Blake, the floor is yours.
Hello. Made it on. Hi, Steph, what up?
What's up?
To all my people, United African Coalition, thank you for everything you do. To Bacola and everyone, I can't thank you enough for your incredible leadership. To Brother Adams, I listened to your presentation earlier about BCC and all that you're doing there, and just know that it means a lot in that manner for those that I'm connecting with. Michael Blake, Assembly member here in the South Bronx, Vice Chair, Democratic National Committee. Sorry for the sound in the background. We're actually giving away food. As you can see, giving out food to the community right now. And look, everybody, we have to win this election. You know, we talk about trade, we talk about healthcare, we talk about opportunities, we talk about immigration, entrepreneurship, education. It's all intertwined. And in large part, I'm doing everything I possibly can for the next 38 days to ensure victory. When we talk about the work that we did in the Obama-Biden administration, I should say, from AGOA to entrepreneurship, all these things are at stake right now. And when we think about the opportunity that's in front of us of having a Black woman as vice president and having a president that has stood by our president and thinking about the broader dynamic, we need this to happen. So very concretely, here's some things we can focus on. Number one, we are asking people to help with our late help efforts. Virtually, You can go and support for 4 weeks, 10 days, or 4 days. The campaign is asking for people. You can do it from the comfort of your living room, but if you have the ability, part-time or full-time, to help for 4 weeks, 10 days, or 4 days, we could partner you up with the states and leadership in the states across the country. Number 2, voter protection. Even if you are a lawyer or not a lawyer, we have 27 state operations going. We are preparing actively for voter protection. Just so you know, Virginia and North Carolina are already voting. So we need people to be helping us on the ground and supporting. If you are willing to travel to help with early voting or day of voting for voter protection, lawyer or not, we will plug you in. We have a national voter protection hotline. So iwillvote.com is the website. iwillvote.com. You go in one central place to be aware of that. Number 3, we're actively raising money because we are preparing for the other side. And we need money to come in quickly, not late, because the faster we can mobilize, we can do more TV, more radio, more digital, and engage in that way. We're going to have a very large African-American, Caribbean-based fundraiser this upcoming Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern that I'm co-hosting. I will put my email in the chat, and I'll put the link in the chat. Ashley Etienne, who was the sister that ran the impeachment efforts against Donald Trump, who joined the campaign. I'm a senior advisor, and Don Graves, who's the senior policy lead, are organizing that for us. That's Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and we're doing that because, of course, the first debate is happening on Tuesday night. And so everybody, when we talk about what's happening, our efforts here on the ground with Little Africa, our efforts nationally with the campaign, our efforts internationally, we have 38 days to save the country. And so I thank you, Steph and Bukola and everyone for allowing me the opportunity. Forgive me again for the sound outside, but we have to win. We absolutely have to win. And so we say thank you. So I'll stop there. I'll put the links in the chat. Again, join us Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Any dollar amount, $25, $50, $100, whatever you can do. Join us for the late help. Join us for the voter protection. We need you engaged to help us bring this home for the next 38 days, everybody.
You're muted, Stephanie. I can't hear you.
Sorry for the interruption for your remarks, but anything happens, especially with politicians who are on the go. So thank you for your patience. Thank you to everybody else on the call for their patience. And so if you want to continue, Fatah, if you need me to repeat the question, I will. But if not, you can go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Stephanie, can I just say something quickly? I'm so sorry, Fatah. So we're also going to go back to the Q&A for the first panel. So please bear that in mind as you continue. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want me to go?
Yes, absolutely. The floor is yours.
Okay. I'll just go into my remarks. So basically, although Blackness is not a monolith, it's a shared experience. And young Africans living in the diaspora share a common experience of what it means to be Black in modern day America. And that shifts like the majority of the conversations we're having with one another, especially on the ground when you're talking to your friends and you're talking about even issues when it comes to equity or equality. And Africans living in the US are among one of the highest educated groups of immigrants, but education level does not triumph racism, which is the underbelly of the American experience. And I want to push back on the idea that, Africans wanting a fair and just and equal America are leftist ideals. Our drive for that is for social justice and fairness and a justice system that is what attracted most of our families to cross the ocean to come to the United States. That is what we dream of when we talk about the American dream. And that is what we all strive for when you're talking about liberty and justice for all. And those ideas of liberty and justice for all American citizens is nonpartisan. It is one of humanitarian lens. And in terms of like Black Lives Matter and the movement of young Africans, or the involvement of young Africans in the movement, is a reality that we face every day. From microaggressions in the workplace to being followed around in stores, interactions with the police. If I always say this, like if the KKK was coming to hang all Black people today, they will not separate Africans from African Americans, Caribbeans. They will. It's Black, and Black is just being categorized in that category. And not only are we in solidarity, but we experience these same things that is crucial for us to be involved, like Michael Blake said. And we have to acknowledge the fact that Africans profit from the sacrifices of African Americans who have made ways in terms of like the civil rights movement, in terms of the Immigration Act. And so it's important that we are in this fight and we're invested in this fight. Also, we must acknowledge the idea that African immigrants being deemed as like the model Black and the issues that have caused a division in the Black community. But at the end of the day, Black is Black. And we must be at the forefront when it comes to issues that affect our community. In terms of not necessarily free, but affordable healthcare for all. Most young Africans have their parents who are essential workers, or they are essential workers. We talked about that earlier. During COVID, we addressed that with the earlier panelists. We've seen the lack of care for the system, for our communities. And our communities have been highly affected by COVID. And when our families are talking about, the differences between where we're from or where our parents grew up and why we came to the US, access to affordable healthcare is an important topic or conversation that is being discussed. And so it's really important that we center our conversations around issues and our values of why it's important, ideals, and what really leans Africans left or wanting to be Democrats, especially young Africans. These are issues that affect us every day. Diana already talked about immigration policy, but also small business policies, right? We have a majority of our community, you already gave the numbers, I'm not gonna go into that, that are affected by COVID due to the pandemic. We've seen a lot of businesses shut down. We've seen a lot of businesses that didn't have PPP, a lot of businesses that didn't have funding. And so it's very important that we have conversations about access to funding, such as grants, and also the conversation that minorities are not really being brought up into the business conversation. And Africans really need to be centered in that conversation to be like, okay, we have economic power. Well, how are we really exercising this to be political power? That transition is very crucial for us in our community to say that we want a place at the table or want a seat at the table when we are talking about policy making or decision making. And the conversations such as, pay equity or equal pay or job security are issues not only for our community, but it's a conversation that all Americans face in general. And these are issues that are the fabric of our society right now and what it means to be, to accomplish the American dream or work hard, but actually getting paid for what you deserve for what you work for. And so what I think to end, what I think the Democratic Party really needs to focus on is speaking to the core values of what it means to be American. And why so many of us as immigrants, especially African immigrants, came into this country in the first place. From the issues of, we talk about immigration reform, newly naturalized citizens. It's very important that we center these conversations around things like Social Security, healthcare, social justice, and more. It was already pointed out earlier, but it's so important that we focus on our power and what it means to have power. I feel like a lot of times the African community, we sit back and like to have decisions made for us. But right now it's very important that we see ourselves reflected in the decisions being made on behalf of our community. When I worked for the 2016 election cycle for Obama for America, when I worked for 2016 for Hillary for America, there was not an African diaspora for Biden. There was no committee that was focused on, or African diaspora for Hillary or African diaspora for Biden. There was no really ethnic community that was focused on addressing issues or bringing us to the table to have people speak on behalf of our community. And right now we have that place. And it's so important that we really build that network and really support each other instead of addressing just like the fragmented issues that happen in our community. It's really important to focus on that. And to end, I think that the Biden-Harris campaign needs to really have a clear stance on these issues that affect us, especially in these last 38 days. Right now, what we see is very broad policy and addressing just immigration reform or issues in general. But what young Africans want or young people want is talk about specifics. If you actually want us to be excited, want us to come out in numbers to the polls, like Obama did, Obama had his policies on his website really early on. And so young people were really excited to see, okay, we're seeing ourselves reflected in these issues that affect our community on a daily basis. The campaign really needs to figure out a way to center that, especially when it comes to contacting young Africans or contacting young people, especially in these last crucial days. And like I said, talking about issues like police brutality or talking about issues like healthcare reform, those are issues that just not plague our community, that plagues a lot of communities in general. So we have to be clear about the lack of adequate solutions to the issues that our community is facing. And so that's where the Biden-Harris campaign can really separate itself from the current administration in these last days. And honestly, what I think is that young people right now, we know that we have to vote because we know that what is at stake. It's not that young people are not trying to vote or don't feel like they need to vote. We know what is at stake. The issue is that we feel like we're not being reflected in the decision making. And so even the Democratic establishment needs to stop pushing young Africans or young voters to say that there's too progressive for the system, and being able to actually include them in the decision making to come up with a solution that is moderate enough that works for all of the parties that are involved, or else you're going to start creating a separate party that is going to be focused on more progressive issues that's going to separate itself from the Democratic establishment.
Thank you so much, Fata. And what I'm hearing consistently from a lot of the remarks, it's messaging, 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 right? We've got to reshape the narrative about what the African voter cares about. And it has to go beyond, it can include, but it has to be a little bit more broader than just immigration and citizenship. And so in the interest of time, I believe one of our panelists had to drop off, but I'm gonna go to Famoud Kone to talk about the census, and not only the efforts of the census, you know, I guess being reshaped this time around to allow people to identify their ethnicities and be specific, but why the data from the census is so important. Because when we talk about business communities, when we talk about Black banks not knowing about African businesses in terms of the data, we need data to kind of shape or inform people that we want to get progressive policies from. And so, Famoud, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Stephanie.
Okay, so I want you to go a little deeper into the census. I know that the census was interrupted in terms of their physical, I guess, outreach efforts because of COVID, which set them back. And then now we know that the census is going to be cut off, you know, at the end of this month on the 30th, which I think was very calculated to do, unfortunately. But can you speak to how successful you think the census is going to be this time around, and why the data from the census is so important, specifically for accurately targeting our communities?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. So just quickly before I forget to mention that about the conclusion of the census, the decision in California on Thursday night was that the U.S. Census Bureau should go ahead and continue the census until October 31st, right? Yeah. So the decision from California was a good one, but we are celebrating that the census potentially could be extended, but you know, maybe the government could appeal that decision. But the judge did rule that the census should continue until October, which was the initial deadline for the census. So hopefully that will go through and we will have work to do. But as far as what the data, the census, I mean, this is a very well-informed audience. So I don't want to give you the nitty-gritty, because I think we're talking about policy, or we're talking about a strategy here. So I believe the audience here is well informed, and I'm looking at the list of participants. And
is there background noise coming from you, or should I?
Hold on, let me see. I don't know if it's.
Okay.
Is it okay? Is it okay now? Is it
perfect.
Me?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think I shouldn't be focusing on the nitty-gritty. I should just be talking about potentially what we here as a team, because the way I see it, I think all of us here are ambassadors within our respective community. And I want to say all of you too are also ambassador for the census. The data, as you all know, with all the different allocations that are made with the census data in terms of housing, immigration, schools, and all of that, we all know the data is very important for those allocations. But in New York City, what we've done specifically in terms of encouraging ethnicity in the African community is we invested significantly in the census. And this was historic. The city have never done this before. We invested $20 million into community-based organizations in the city of New York to use them as credible ambassadors to recruit their respective community, about 100 and some more organizations apply for this. But I'm proud to announce that 6 African organizations got about $500,000 to directly mobilize Africans in the city to participate. And we've had significant increase of Africans in the census. We haven't given up yet because we still got, 4 or 5 more days to go. But the strategy worked. Initially, we had a comprehensive strategy to go out and get the entire city counted. As I said earlier, our self-response rate last 10 years was 62%, and the mayor didn't want our response rate to be that number. He wanted it to be higher. So he went ahead and created our office. Right now, even with the pandemic, we are at 62%. Our self-response rate in the city of New York is at 62%, with the pandemic. So I think our strategy worked. If we hadn't had the pandemic, we would have maxed that number. But as far as the African community is concerned, you know, New York City has the largest concentration of Africans throughout this nation, right? And we believe that whatever strategy we implement in the city of New York will be replicated by other predominant African cities around the country. So our CCF, the Complete Count Fund that invested $20 million into the city, attracted many community-based organizations, and 6 of these organizations were Africans: Yankasa, Setiatu, African Community Together, Congolese Alliance, United Malian Associations, and Setiatu. These are 6 prominent African organizations that I've worked with, and we created something called the African Coalition, African Census Coalition. We worked together as a team because we didn't want overlapped our effort. We wanted to make sure we get the city entire population counted. This has never been done anywhere in the country, and the model we created as the New York City African Coalition has not been done anywhere in the country as well. But we needed to do that for a city that had the largest concentration of Africans. And right now, we still want to encourage the African community to participate. We have seen significant increase in African participation in the Bronx, where you have the largest concentration of Africans. We've seen it in Manhattan, in the Harlem area, where you have a great number of Africans as well, and in Staten Island. Staten Island, as a matter of fact, has the highest self-response rate in the city of New York. So the city African community has been really responsive to the census, but we think there are plenty of other Africans that have not self-responded to the census, and we are encouraging them to do that, because as some of the things you guys have talked about, policy, in terms of policy on housing, policy on immigrations, all of these things are determined by census data. And we have told our community that they need to respond, because we need to make our city count so that we can get the funding that we need. And the analogy I give people all the time is that the census is like this party that everyone is going to, and we Africans, typically, we don't like to RSVP, but we've been told to RSVP to this party, but we don't want to RSVP to the party, but we want to go to the party. And so 100 people RSVP to the party host made allocation for 100 people, 100 plate, like reach 100 plate with jollof rice and chicken and all of that. And then another 50 people decided, no, I'm not going to RSVP, I'm just going to show up. But what that does is that now the 100 people who RSVP that had a rich plate will have to cut up pieces of their plate just to accommodate you. 50 folks that didn't RSVP, which is not fair. So the way I say to other people in the community, folks like you guys, that it's not fair that other people are not RSVP into the census, because at the end of the day, our resources are going to get cut short. So it becomes our responsibility as a member of the community and leaders of a community to serve as ambassadors, to let people know and to dismiss all the myths around the census that we need to get, because that's one of the reason I was at City Hall. I took the census job because I felt that the African community and the immigrant community was one of the undercounted community. I wanted to make sure we make an impact, we get our folks counted, and I decided to take the job on. And I'm glad we've done significant effort in getting people to self-respond, but there's plenty to be done in the last 5 days. We still can encourage everyone on this call, please be an ambassadors in your respective city. your all ambassadors in your respective community. Encourage your folks in your community to do the census, especially the African community. We need to encourage it, because the way I see our success in responding to the census will be a function of our success in November 3rd. All right, so I'll end with that.
Thank you so much, Famoud, for that. And our last panelist is going to discuss voter suppression. And so the reason why I chose to have, Ms. Uftu and Famoud to go last is because more of what they had to talk about was data rich. And so this is for you, and say, this election is being touted as one of the most contentious elections by far. I mean, given just the fact that it's a presidential election, the census is going on, and then we have all this racial tension going on. And then we have a current administration that's also fueled a lot of the racial conversation, right? Maybe not explicitly, but through implicit, policies and maybe no, even explicit policies. And so I am just concerned about, can you speak to the restrictive practices that you see going on to scare voters from actually turning out? I know that states have made accommodations to have early voting, right? And some people, the reality is they're gonna wait till November 3rd. Some people are not gonna mail in their ballot. Some people are not gonna go do early voting. Some people have been scared away. And so can you speak to what work that you're doing, but what you've been hearing in terms of myths and restrictive practices to scare voters, particularly immigrant voters?
Right. Thank you. I think that when we hear the words voter suppression, I think the image that comes into folks' minds is, Bubba on the back of a pickup truck with a shotgun trying to intimidate Black voters. And while there is certainly that, that is very much still happening in the year of our Lord 2020, the truth of the matter is that that suppression has gotten much more sophisticated. And so we, as organizers, as defenders of democracy, as ordinary citizens, as members of a community, also need to get more sophisticated in our response and how we neutralize it. One of our primary concerns is around sort of misinformation and disinformation, and particularly how quickly it is spread. My family makes fun of me that I just got sort of graduated into the auntie group chat. And one of the concerns is that, so the way that misinformation and disinformation works is that it's designed to distract, to dismay, to discourage. And so it works to leverage the sort of love and care and trust that we have in our communities. So if an auntie or somebody that you trust or just in community with posts something, it's designed to stoke outrage and to sow the seeds of fear. And many times it's not based in fact or reality. And so Black voters, new voters, young voters, new Americans are often the primary targets for misinformation and disinformation from bad actors, both foreign and domestic. I think a lot was made about the 2016 elections and the role that Russia played in sowing the seeds of misinformation and disinformation, and creating memes that disparage Secretary Clinton, that got shared widely in our WhatsApp groups, in the group me's, on Facebook, etc. And so one of the ways that we're working to combat that is to do digital media literacy, but some basic things that people can do. To check the date, check the source, et cetera. But also just making sure that folks recognize that we all have the power, that if we're informed, to combat that disinformation by not retweeting and reposting and saying, look at these lies, but making sure that you position yourself as a trusted messenger, that we are combating the way that we neutralize it, neutralize the impact is by putting factual information out. Again, the algorithms on a lot of these social media platforms don't really care if you retweet and say this is a lie. You've already done the retweet. So you are a part of the disinformation machine and you're amplifying it. Right. I think that we're talking about the attack on the Postal Service, right? And it's not just about vote by mail and mail service, but it's also, you know, people get their medications during via Postal Service, et cetera. And so delaying the time in which people can get an absentee ballot, and then delaying the time that the counties can get it so that it can be counted is a problem and is a part of a larger voter suppression effort. I think that, you know, I will say that the President of the United States, as well as the press secretary, White House press secretary, and several other people are a part of a large campaign to sow the seeds of confusion, fan the flames of fear, and make people ignore the power that we have. And I think that, you know, so if I'm to leave anyone with a message in this particular moment, it is that we are so powerful that, you know, they're working very hard to distract, to dismay, to discourage, to prevent people from participating in our elections. And we have to do everything that we can to resist that.
Thank you. And so just really quickly, just as a follow-up, and then I'm going to transition it over to my colleague. So, you know, with voter suppression, I'm just wondering, given the fact that we're in a pandemic, and so, you know, the ballot won't be counted that night, like we won't know on election night, potentially who's going to be the president. What is going to be in place? What resources are going to be in place to make sure that this election is not stolen? I mean, I remember the Gore election, what happened in Florida. And so that scares me. And then can you speak to provisional ballots? Because when people are not on their roll, they get to sign a provisional ballot. But are those ballots will they be counted in time to contribute to the count? I mean, I don't know.
So, I mean, what I will tell you is that in states all across the country, secretaries of state, county board of election officials, there are tons of people who are bad actors and are not to be trusted with maintaining our democracy. That what you are seeing right now is happening. This is real. The president refusing to concede is a real possibility. He has told you that, you know, he's not going to leave without a fight. And so one of the ways I think that we can challenge that is to have overwhelming participation in our elections. Until we can change the people who are responsible for counting our votes, until we can change our president and our secretaries of state, we have to have historic levels of participation to make sure that the will of the people, the will of the voters, is clear and it's loud and it's undeniable. Number one. Number two, you know, we are working with a nonpartisan coalition, that we being the New Georgia Project Action Fund. It's the organization that I work with, but, you know, between I Will Vote, the voter protection teams that are stood up by the DNC, the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the ACLU, like election protection and voter protection is on deck right now. And so there are tons of ways for people to plug in as a part of a state and local effort or as a part of a national effort. And yes, provisional ballots do count. Now, I would encourage you to fight like hell to make sure that you are given a regular ballot. If you are eligible to vote, then you should be given a regular ballot. And getting a provisional ballot is better than nothing, but I would encourage you to not let them, because the challenge with provisional ballots is that in most jurisdictions, you file a provisional ballot and then you have to go back within the next 3 days to fix whatever was wrong that led them to giving you a provisional ballot. So if they're saying that you're not on the voter rolls, you have 3 days to prove that you are. Right? If they're saying that you're not a citizen, you have 3 days to prove that you are, right? And so, you know, I know how hard it is to get people to go out to vote once. So getting people to go out 2 and 3 times is a task of epic proportions. Not saying that it can't be done, but if you have influence or you know, you have the ear of fellow voters, then I would encourage you not to be moved, to plant your feet, to demand that you get a regular ballot if you think that you are eligible for a regular ballot.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, and I guess the goal of voter suppression is to inconvenience voters in such a way that you don't want to go back to the poll, right? And you know, Obama talked about voting can't be a matter of convenience for us. We have to take the day off if necessary because it's the priority. So thank you so much for your time. I want to thank all of the panelists for the second panel for all of your remarks on these issues. I mean, if there were any, you know, takeaways that I had from the remarks, one is that messaging from the Biden-Harris campaign has to be shaped to include issues that are important to Africans. We've got to see ourselves reflected in the policies, period, beyond immigration and citizenship. Also, we have to be ambassadors in our communities around the census and talking about why it's important that resources that are, you know, selected for us are for us. And so that means that everybody has to go out and fill out the census. The second thing is voter protection, ensuring that, you know, that we don't retweet, you know, bad messages. I'm guilty of that, right? I'm always, and all Africans stay on WhatsApp. So that's like, that's danger waiting to happen because we retweet and share a lot of bad messages through WhatsApp. And then lastly, in terms of business, again, messaging has to be sent to Black banks and other resources so they understand the need of the African business in terms of resources and funding. So thank you again. I am going to turn over this portion of the program to my colleague, Bukola Shinoga. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Excellent. And kudos to the team, the panelists on domestic policy. Wealth of information. We really appreciate you guys coming on and you know, talking to our listeners. Now, we'll go back to the first part of the discussion, the first panel discussion, which was on the U.S.-Africa trade and economic development policy. And these are my questions to the panelists. And my questions are, what policy recommendation would you recommend to the Biden-Harris ticket to facilitate and improve trade between Africa and the United States? That's question number one. I'm going to repeat that question. What policy recommendations would you recommend to the Biden-Harris ticket to facilitate and improve trade between Africa and the United States? Secondly, second question, I believe the YALI concept is one way to ease the Africa brain drain phenomenon and build a knowledge-based economy in Africa. How can the Biden-Harris formalize this concept in terms of a legislative policy? I'm gonna direct the first question to, both questions to Dana. Dana Reed, you can take that, please. Yeah, you're on mute, I think. Okay.
Sorry, okay. Yeah, thank you. So from my perspective, I don't have a written policy. Hopefully that will be a product of this. But policies need to be inclusive of capital. That's what works. And whether that capital is, again, to grow businesses on the continent, or capital here, more grants, right? That's another form of capital, so that we can spend the resources here. Bukola, you know that we have partnered on a couple of RFPs, right? And so give us more insight and clarity, make that process easier so that it is inclusive, right? And because all of that is helpful, so those grants can go to not just food banks types of situations during a pandemic. Hopefully this will pass soon, but what happens after that? So we want capital. It's all about capital. We need, to understand, where the government flows of capital are going and how can we be a part of that conversation so that we can tell you where the capital needs to go, and who needs to be in those conversations directing it. And it has to be people that look like us, that are a part of the diaspora, because we are the ones that know intimately what the needs are, when they're needed, how they're needed, why they're needed. And so uncomplicate that process for us, right? And that's just strictly on sort of the RFQ side. So that's legislation, right? So many states have done a good job. This is, for instance, have done a good job with, MWBE participation. I'd like to see something like that for the diaspora, right? Not just minorities, but let's have specific for, Africans and African Americans in the diaspora, so that we can it'll be easier for us to work together and to partner together. Because again, if, when we've when we have the diaspora working together, the numbers and the intellect and everything else becomes that much more powerful, which could be why it hasn't happened yet. They tend to try to keep us apart. So fiscal policies around capital flows, both from government directed dollars, again, the RFQ process, as well as more programs led by the government from the federal level, the highest level, on ways to invest in Africa, right? And those can be big investments or small investments. Bukola, you and I have talked about many very grassroots, for-profit agriculture projects and whatnot. Well, where's the capital to support those, right? And it's in our government's best interest to have a say in that. I don't want to get too far into a discussion, but if we don't, if our government doesn't, we've seen the Chinese will. And so draft policy around capital is the simplest way to put it.
Thank you, Dana. So Jean Adams and Stephanie, you guys have done tremendous work in international education. So my question to you is along the same line. Education is the best equalizer, right? And considering the amount of the knowledge base of African immigrants, the talent, how do you see these in terms of policy? How do you feel in the areas that you have worked? What do you think the Biden-Harris ticket can do to formalize a policy, legislative policy, to sort of better inform the work that you guys have done already, or maybe expand it?
Well, I mean, I think in the area of education, I mean, there's always pathways. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about education, that it's very fluid. And I think that if I had the opportunity to invest in African education, I would start by investing in African education that's already in the United States. We have hundreds of thousands of very young millennial young people at countless universities who are looking to go back home. And I think that we could provide them with tremendous amount of training, workshops, information, assistance that will help prepare them for transitioning back into the African economic environment with new ideas and skills and perspectives on business development. I think, again, we have numerous young people here who would like to go home, but because of the current economic situation, they find that it's just more, personally advantageous to stay here. But what if we had some type of a reverse YALI program where we actually develop African minds here around African investment and African administration of industrial concepts, and we're able to send them back home with that information. I think that would be great. But in regards to the overall picture, we need, industrial assistance programs, around policy that provide resources, technology, and tremendous amount of coaching. I think I've met lots of African Americans, let alone other people, who are very much interested in going to Africa and using their particular skill sets. And if we were to design something like that, almost like a Peace Corps for economic development, that could be interesting. I'm a major advocate of micro investments. I think that, the big industrial plans are wonderful, but I think on the ground, operating an effective business does a tremendous amount for any community. And I think that within the African context, with the emerging middle class and people having funds consumer use, I think that could work. I think within the university setting, again, we need to have more programs that deal with exchanges, specifically around industry and around economic development and around business, incubation, in which we can send people back and forth. Remember, there's just as much for us to learn as it is for the Africans to learn. We like to position ourselves as we're bringing something to other people. But oftentimes, if we were smarter, we would also take, and bring information from them here. And I think within the policy arena, again, a lot of African countries are really working hard to develop global industries and develop markets. And I think there needs to be a greater effort in dollars spent. Of course, we know that the aid programs are important, but someone once said that the aid programs are like taking money from poor people in America to give it to basically rich people in other places, because the money never trickles down to the people who need it. The money, those programs generally don't trickle down. So I think that we need to ask the governments, and specifically those people who are really in the industrial areas and really trying to make change, what do they need, as opposed to just coming up with our own policies of what we think we want to give them. We need to ask better questions. And that's it.
Right. Stephanie, what would you add to that?
Can't hear you.
You're mute.
Can't hear you.
While I'm waiting for
technology.
Shelton, are you on? Hello? Okay. So Stephanie's trying to fix the, what is it called?
No.
Audio. Okay, because I don't see anyone else on the U.S. trade policy. All right, so I think, we are going to have to wrap up. Sorry, Stephanie, and also I couldn't get Shelton back on. All right, so thank you so much, guys, for joining us. So the whole idea here is to collate some of these recommendations that, the talking points have a lot of, is loaded with, ideas and recommendations on the domestic policy in terms of what Africans want to hear from the Biden-Harris ticket. We hear you loud and clear. So we'll go back to the tape. That's the work that we're going to do, and extract some of the recommendations that I feel were expressed in your presentation, and then maybe circle back with everyone. The idea is to see if we can develop a policy paper based on this Zoom. And also, we're looking to get out the vote in New York City. At least we're in New York City for our community. I've been a part of the census drive since December up until now, and we have turned a lot of our people to get counted. So we're also driving them to make sure they get to the poll, they get counted. Especially if you have any 18-year-old in your community or your family members that are 18, that just turned 18 this year in the US, that number of registered voters in the African community is very low. So that's one of the things that United African Coalition is embarking on, to get out there and get out the vote. I would say thank you again for coming, and you can join us, become a member of United African Coalition at www.unitedafricancoalition.org. And in my own capacity as the executive director of this organization, I see a lot of resource here that came to this panel discussion, and we're looking to continue connecting with you to be part of our discussion, be part of our board, whether advisory board or board members, because the talent that are here today, we couldn't really pay for if we had to go and source people. So we're really grateful that you're able to join us. Charles, are you still on? Would you like, Charles is our chairman of United African Coalition. Charles, any closing thoughts from you, if you can hear me? Okay, otherwise, Stephanie, any
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to all the panelists, and I just want to echo something I heard from Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, that the Biden-Harris ticket, a lot of people are, I guess, are not as enthused, and so it's like a hard lifting to convince people why this ticket matters. I see the Biden-Harris ticket as the door, not necessarily the destination. We need allies that we're going to be able to negotiate policy with. So once we get through that door, and then we, work very closely with the administration to turn out things that we need for the African community. So with that in mind, I am a supporter of the Biden-Harris ticket, and I hope you are too. And, let's make this happen. Thank you so much for being on the panel.
Thank you, Valentine Arnold, and thank you to Dr. Bilateral Williams for joining us. For you guys, an honor. Thank you. All right, have a good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining, and thank you. Have a good one.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Bye.